Hey there, and welcome to episode number 77 of Killer POV. I'm your co-host, Rob G. from Icons of Fright. With me is Rebekah McKendry from Fangoria.
What the hell is he doing?
Elric
totally
looks...
80s.
Wow. Elric's flipped his... Wait, let me take a picture of you so people can understand what we're making fun
just
of
ruined
in
the
a
show.
moment.
Yeah,
You
you've
totally
completely
ruined the
messed it
show
up
because
now.
this is audio, not video. He looks kind of like Cyclops. He turned his... do you not want to see us?
Geordie from Next Generation.
Yes, Georgie's a good one.
Right.
Roots.
As most Americans would
That's
know him
Elric
from.
Kane.
I know him from Reading Rainbow.
Okay.
That's Elric Kane. Inside Horror. Jump Cut Cafe.
Isn't that the Gore Horse show? Somebody wrote me this weekend and said, the Gore Horse is at an event. And I was just like, wow, she still exists.
I've never seen her at an event.
No, neither have I. I don't know who she is.
I don't think she exists. Does she?
I don't think she exists.
Real figment of your imagination. Anyways, so we are back. We have a fun
90-minute show.
We must keep it brisk. I
We're gonna
had people
try.
texting me like, really, Bekah, 3 hours?
But you know what? Rodman was a good guest. He
Now,
was
the problem
worth
is
it.
there are some guests, and these viewers who are listening will know this. Some of you want us to go longer, and some of you want us to go shorter.
Yes.
I know a lot of people say 3 hours isn't enough, and a lot of other people probably would like 90
Listen,
minutes.
90 minutes.
When tequila's involved, I
Yeah.
lose track of all time. So
Yeah,
that,
plus he
that
was
the
like a
culprit.
horror nerd, so like he knew what was going on.
Unlike most
Yeah.
shows, we have a guy who helps us record the show who always goes longer. Like he's in the
I know,
booth
Parker's in
and I
the
say,
booth,
we're
he's
about to
just
wrap up, and he goes,
cheering.
no, more.
Yeah,
He's
he's
actually
just
shaking
cheering.
his
He's
head
like,
now.
keep me here all night, guys.
That's how we
Parker,
roll.
if you want one of these, by the way, please come in. I'm pointing at my beer because he's earned it.
It is
Unlike Elric Kane, who doesn't earn my
It's
free
October
beer.
now.
Brings
It's October.
beer.
It's officially October.
I want to bring that up. It's October. So
It's
we begin
October.
now.
Yes, it is.
And we
I
have a lot
actually,
to do.
Yeah, we've all. I mean, you went to Beyond Fest a little bit.
A lot of stuff.
You saw a lot of stuff, huh?
I saw a lot of stuff.
All right, kick us off. What did you see? What's worth
Uh,
talking about?
Well, the first movie, and the ones that you've already talked about, I'll go through quicker. The Guest is the most fun I've had at the movies this year.
Oh, yes.
And that's not even just like, and it is a horror film, but it's also a lot of other films. There is a horror film inside that film for sure. So,
Okay.
so I think it's very easy to categorize it within horror as well as you could also put in sci-fi. You could put in probably a bunch of categories
Right.
if you wanted, because there's enough Stepfather, there's enough Halloween reference, there's just enough stuff in there. It is just so flat out fun, and it kind of ruined me for that day because I had the day off. I went and saw The Guest, and it was about the most excited I'd been for a long time because it was just so funny and charming
It is.
and enjoyable, not in a bad throwback like, oh, it's trying to be like the 80s. It actually is like the 80s.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's like the feeling you had
It's-
watching the 80s without trying to be like that. Yeah, it's
Have you
definitely one of the
seen-
year's best.
Have you seen the trailer? That
No, I've seen nothing.
Well, no, not before, but now after. The original trailer doesn't give away too much, but Jason Eisner, the guy that did
I
Hobo
heard
with
this,
Shotgun,
yeah.
he recut a trailer that just went live. And if you haven't seen the movie, like Bekah, don't watch that trailer.
Yeah.
It gives
Okay.
everything away. But it's kind of the greatest 2-minute reel if you have seen the movie.
I saw
and you
Wingard
know
write
all
to him
the twists.
saying, on your next movie, I'm going to cut a trailer to Eisner's next one because he thought it was amazing too. So.
It is. I'll send it to you. I think you'll appreciate it because it makes me realize why I love that movie as much as I do. 'Cause
I
I'm
can
like,
say
oh,
it's
man.
the only movie I've seen this year where I'm not even kidding, where it ended and I almost felt like going, I kind of just felt like watching it again. I never really had, because it is light and it's not deep. It's definitely not a film with under the surface. There's probably not a lot going on,
Right.
but you just don't care. And largely that is a lot to do with Dan Stevens, the actor.
He's great.
From Downton Abbey.
So great.
Because I remember everyone's talking about, well, he's a star. And it's like, I can't remember last time I saw a movie where it ended and you went, oh, that guy's like a mega star in one movie. Like it took one movie. And even if no one sees this movie,
Doesn't
agents
matter,
will
he's
see it,
so
people will
good.
see it. He's just so charming. It's crazy. And
Yeah.
so, but I saw that in the daytime because I had the day off from child wrangling. And so then Beyond Fest was kicking off later that night.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just like smiling ear to ear watching that film. And then first one I saw was Alexandra Aja's hotly anticipated Ticket Horns. Mike Williamson from Secret 16 said it was the best film of the year.
Wow.
That
I'm
says a
seeing it
lot.
on Tuesday night.
Yeah.
They're doing a press screening for
So
Tuesday night.
all people who like Freddy's Dead and The Mangler will love Horns. You guys
So
will.
it was not your cup of tea.
No, you know what? It's actually it's a pretty good movie, but it's definitely not a great movie. It is, you know what? It's weird. I feel like the problem with the movie is that I think that Aja was the wrong choice for it because of the kind of movies he makes. I see why he wanted to do it because it's a chance to still do horror and maybe change it. It's like adult version of Twilight and things like that, but with really dark humor. The humor when it's hitting is really good. The horror stuff and the mystery stuff, you kind of see through it from the start. I can see that this will be a popular film. I think it'll do pretty well. I just didn't necessarily buy it all. I heard people after saying how much they like Daniel Radcliffe's performance. I was like, he's all right. It just, for me, and it's a big movie. Like it's not like an indie horror. It feels like quite a big production. It looks great. And, it felt like I see a bit of Stephen King in it. So that's kind of interesting because it's his son wrote the book it's based on. It had so many interesting themes and ideas. I felt like maybe Aja is not the right one for that kind of material because I think it needed a lighter touch to get all of that in there. There's a lot going on.
I don't think Aja understands humor.
Yeah, the humor and the romance stuff, which is a major part of it. You have to really believe the romance. It's kind of on the nose. It's the kind of stuff that people who don't make films in English, maybe, you know what I mean? But I think people are going to like it. It's a good film. Later that night, we watched Astron 6's new production that a lot of people have been excited about called The Editor.
I've heard so much about that one.
Yeah, a lot of people are interested in
I've
that.
heard that it's incredibly smart and a wonderful like comedy parody of horror, but that it's for a very, very precise audience.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're definitely the audience. It's interesting. I think it's a real crowd pleaser in terms of humor. The real problem is after about 20 minutes, you get the joke. And I was impressed because there was references to things like
The Beyond,
Strange Vice of Mrs. Vard, really obscure giallo is referenced. And I mean, literal references, like where they recreate a scene.
Right.
And some really good stuff in there. And it is across the board. I was laughing from start to end, but there wasn't enough story, or really any story, to actually care about it as a movie. And so at the end, I was kind of like, yeah, it's kind of like just like watching Scary Movie, but a smart, not even smart, a version that's referencing things that are more interesting to me. And so I think the people who like Astron 6 stuff, I'm not as aware of a lot of their stuff as everyone else is. I think people will be happy from that and have a good time. But Mike hated it. He said it was the worst film of the year. And he didn't laugh once. And I thought that was very interesting because I kept looking over him going, because it's his kind of humor. And he just goes, this was his opinion. He said, this movie is being made by people who hate giallo. And they are mocking it. And there's no Zuckerberg love for what they're doing. And I didn't necessarily see that. What I would say is there's a character called the Editor, and he's on screen quite a lot in the first 30 minutes. And I find it much more compelling when he's part of the narrative. And at a certain point, he's just in it less. I don't know why. And it's not as compelling. Because it's not really a movie. It is kind of a set, it's scenes.
Just, by the way, just to put it in context for anyone that's new to the show.
Yeah.
Elric keeps referencing Mike Williamson, who has what I would say a rather unique set of tastes for movies.
He likes The Mangler.
Go back to our Drunken Debates episode.
Drunken Debates episode is the one.
And either you'll think he's a lunatic with odd taste, or you'll agree with him. And that's a good gauge.
It is. And I think this one is, I think you'd be crazy not to think it's really funny. And it's, humor's great. You want me to, I've got a couple more. You want me to?
Yeah, keep rocking.
I feel bad. You already know about this one, Willow Creek.
Oh, yeah. All right,
I have decided, you know what? I might break up with found footage. We've broken up before. We've had our moments, found footage.
Well, this week you were texting me in the middle of it.
Except
actually,
you were really dead on with your analysis of it, actually. I mean, besides, maybe I felt a little differently about the end. I was actually thinking about it, though. You also have a better setup. And also because I have a sleeping kid in the other room, I'm usually playing the sound a lot lower.
Oh, yeah.
And in a movie like that where really nothing's happening on camera at all in that movie.
Sound is pivotal.
So I still heard everything, but I probably was a little less into it. But I've got in your analysis last week where you were talking about how insanely bored you were at the start. The problem is it really is literally just a trace of Blair Witch. And so you're completely right.
Totally. Structurally, it's just he just redid Blair Witch.
And it feels... Because I like Bobcat, and so I was excited because I thought at least there'll be something subversive in here somewhere. I just thought it was totally vanilla. And when it got to the end, I was like, you know what? It's really cool. The cover of this box art. If that was the movie, I would have just been all over it. But for me, there was a couple cool moments, just right flashes at the end. But that's not, for me, that wasn't like enough. I was like, oh man, if this is all found footage has right now, I guess I'm done. So
and just to clarify, because I did get a little shit during the week for my somewhat positive review. I didn't love the movie.
I know. Yours was pretty
It wouldn't
accurate.
even be in my top 10. I said the first half was really boring and just the same as everything else. I just said that the last 20 minutes were kind of terrifying, at least for me.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I'm going to revisit it and watch it over and over.
It got quite a lot of good reviews, though.
Yeah.
I don't think you were alone. I think it had a lot of...
that.
I am surprised, too, because I think... here's my problem. I think the main thing with found footage you have to do now... is because you can't necessarily be that original with the visual, is to get likable and interesting characters. And they weren't unlikable at all, but there's just something, I didn't really buy them as humans. I bought them as actors in a found footage film. The whole time the guy looked like an actor. He didn't look like a guy who just picked it. So, maybe a guy with a big beard, maybe Jeremy Gardner in that same movie I might have bought because he would look like a guy obsessed with Bigfoot. That guy did not. That guy looked obsessed with his hair.
Right.
He didn't look obsessed with Bigfoot.
No, I'll give you that much.
It was the one thing about it I did like is that I want to go to that town.
Yeah,
like
totally.
Seeing the big Bigfoot burger place. I was like, oh, I want to go there.
Yeah, I want a Bigfoot burger.
But it's fun. And the next couple I'll go quick because one of them I share with Bekah.
Yep.
I made it to the end of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre with live score, but I only made it. I wasn't planning on going, but I knew the programmer guy. I went to the front, watched about the last 20 minutes. Very pleased I didn't go.
So I heard.
That said, seeing the eyeball.
It sounded dramatic.
Seeing the eyeball of Marilyn Burns on a screen that big when I was standing up close was worth me walking in there because I was like, oh my God. It just looked incredible. But
you can't.
It turns it into a Fulci film. Is what it did, and it's not a Fulci film, and shouldn't be a Fulci film. And the craziest thing, which shocked me because I got there for the end, is these kind of drones they were playing, these kind of synth drones, completely drown out the screaming, the laughing, and the chainsaw of the whole last 20 minutes.
That's kind of that's the weird thing about playing a live score. Just so people understand, Texas Chainsaw Massacre played as part of Beyond Fest. Death Waltz Recordings did a recording. I forget the name of the musician, so forgive me, but they did, somebody rescored Chainsaw as an experiment specifically to play a new score to it live. They did something similar last year with the movie Pieces. So it's just a weird experiment. It doesn't replace, or there's no way to get this version. I mean, Death Waltz did put out a record that of just the music that you could only get at this screening. So, it's weird because that's the thing. When you have a live band there, they are going to drown out, the
I didn't even see the band. I didn't even really see who was playing it. It was like obviously someone in the corner because more like maybe a kind of DJ type musician. But
I prefer what last year what they did was Goblin. Like they had Goblin play a set.
Yeah, that was awesome.
And there was visuals, but then you got to see the movie after. And I think that's a cool little marriage of concert and movie.
That was a very fun
The main thing is Texas Chainsaw was kind of perfect, especially the sound. I mean, the sound, but it was really weird because what it did, I noticed straight away. I could tell from the audience, it killed any sense of humor that's in that film. So the scene at the dinner table where everyone's screaming at her, as terrifying as that is, whenever it plays, I always laugh too, because it's just involuntary. In this you can't because there's this growing drone. And then when he's running after her down the path, you don't hear anything. All you hear is the drone. So you don't even hear the chainsaw when Leatherface runs. And I'm just watching it. Oh, weird. And so I was glad I didn't go. I was going for, The House of the Devil. I saw a few minutes of that on screen. I didn't stay for either of them in the end because everyone was just milling about. So I kind of got distracted. But it was cool to see those movies getting played on the big screen.
Sure.
And then the last day, Bekah, I'll let Bekah kick this one off. But we saw a film called Starry Eyes, which was one of my more anticipated
Produced
indies
by
this
one
year.
of our previous guests,
Travis Stevens.
Yes.
Dennis Widmer is one of the directors. I can't remember. Kevin Kolch.
Kevin
Kolch.
Is the other director. Something like that.
What did you think of it? Because I'll let you talk for a sec.
Yeah, it was teamed up with, it was Starry Eyes and Possession that they did.
How dare you beat me to that punch?
Sorry, that they did back to back.
You may have heard of the movie.
Who brought the posters to that movie?
I know, and Elric is such a nerd. He brought his own posters to the damn screen.
They looked amazing.
Yeah.
They looked great. And Marilyn Manson was there. I thought I saw him taking a photo in front of them.
Hey.
Wait, Marilyn Manson was there?
Oh, yeah. He was standing in the path the whole way so everyone could see him.
Wow.
I think he might have been with the lead actress because somebody turned to me, who I sat with afterwards, goes, if she's with him, that's real turn off.
Yeah. No, it was, I walked in really late because one of my really good friends from grad school was in town. So we were like next door at the Pig and Whistle having drinks and everything. So I walked in like right as everyone was going inside. So I saw Elric for 5 seconds.
Gene Simmons was there.
I didn't.
I saw a photo afterwards. I didn't see him, but afterwards I saw Gene Simmons and his wife in front of a poster too. I was like, "What the hell is this?"
Wow.
Oh my God!
But it is a Faustian tale about L.A. So maybe with the devil and all that, maybe that's where all these guys have their deals already in place.
Yeah. Starry Eyes, I'd been looking forward to a lot because Amanda Fuller, who's one of she's like the second lead actress, is one of my really good friends. I love her dearly.
Probably because of Travis Stevens, I'm guessing, because there was Cheap Thrills overlap.
Yeah, because she was in Cheap Thrills,
and
there was Red, White, and Blue overlap too. Because the guy who
Mark
played,
Center.
Mark Center was in Red, White, and Blue.
The reason
so
I think that is because the guys up in their Q&A mentioned that it started as a Kickstarter and they cast the lead, but everything else they hadn't cast, and it was a really tiny film, like a $50,000 film, and then suddenly Travis came on board and brought it suddenly Pat Healy was in it.
Yeah.
So I'm betting Amanda, Pat Healy, all those people probably came
afterwards.
having
Yeah.
been I'm guessing it, but it definitely added a whole another dimension, and probably markability went up tenfold.
I loved it. I thought that it was
Yeah,
phenomenally
it's
done.
definitely one of the better indies of the year.
Yeah, I wanted more of the cults and less of her friends hanging out.
So, yeah, that's really the
I don't
indie.
even know cults. I don't know anything about this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's not kind of cult. So it's hard.
it's not
We will
even
do
a
it
cult,
spoiler free.
really.
No, it's not really. But it
I'll
is
say that
Faustian tale. That's all you really need to know.
There's supernatural stuff going on, but they touch on it so briefly that you never really even find out what it is. You just know, okay, something weird's going on over there, but we don't really get to know what it is because we're stuck with her and her friends.
Now, is it like the Larry Fessenden thing where it could be real, but it could be just crazy people?
No, they've
Oh,
kind of go out of their way to make it seem real. Because I kept waiting for it to be like, she's like in, like a Jacob's
Unless it's
ladder,
from
like
her
she died
perspective.
or something. But
Unless it could be not happening if it was all told. It's kind of hard
From
to
her
tell if it's all
perspective?
from her perspective. But you know what's cool about it? Afterwards, I said it's one of the few films I've seen in the horror thing where it really takes you. Where you end up is very different from where you start. And often I feel like horror kind of just does the same thing. I felt like this took a character and took them somewhere very different by the end of the movie. And halfway through, I couldn't even remember what she was like at the start because she had changed so much. And I really, really liked it. It's a great performance. It's like,
that's
it's definitely
the
one
best
of the key
selling point of the movie is Alex Iso does an amazing job in it.
And she was an unknown that they cast, not even knowing if she could pull it off. Like they were like, we don't even know if she's going to be able to do all this crazy stuff.
Yeah,
But-
and I got to say, like, she makes the movie. Like, if I had seen that same movie with other people in the roles,
Yeah, it probably would have
I
been different.
probably wouldn't like it. But she
Interesting.
kind
I really
of
want
sold it.
to say to you, I think they're getting maybe a VOD in November, and I really want to try to get Dennis on the show because listening to them talk about how it changed the kind of scale of production was really interesting, and it really is. I think you're going to like it a lot. It's it's not perfect, but that's indies. It's very hard to be perfect, and the limitations tend to be more like where you would wish they would maybe go a little more Argento, a little more crazy on the lighting setups for scenes like when they're dealing with things that are otherworldly. They don't, but there's something that's very Manson-esque in the middle of this film, and that without kind of going into details, and because I think they're trying to reference like LA and the kind of brutality of LA. Because one thing he said at the start, which was fascinating before the movie started, he said, think about all the crazy stuff that's ever happened, all the major crimes. It's always something to do with entertainment, whether it's a musician like Manson or an act. And so this is about an actress who really wants to be known. And the talent. So it starts maybe this first 30 minutes is a little more comedy, kind of like everyday real, and it grabbed me a little less. And once it started, the horror elements started coming in, it became a really effective film. Yeah. And I think they did a great job. It was good.
The only thing I'm familiar with is the music, because I think Waxworks Records is putting out a vinyl of the soundtrack, and it's the guys that did the score for Room 2.
Which I loved, which was probably my favorite.
I like the score better than
the movie. It didn't grab me maybe once I listened to it without, I wasn't thinking about the score as much as Room 237, where it was like, whoa.
Yeah.
But maybe I have to hear it isolated.
And I remembered. Sorry, I was drinking before I saw the movie, so I'm recalling conversations I had now. You'd asked, could it have like all been in her head, or is it, affirmatively real? And I remembered I discussed with my friend Alicia right after the movie ended how it had to be real, or at least we thought it was, because the filmmakers were addressing it as real. They went up there and they were immediately like, oh, so at the end when this, and this happened.
Okay.
And they weren't setting it up as like a David Lynch, what do you think?
Right.
They were like, oh no, this is a cult. It's, this. So that was kind of my affirmative of like, nope, you get what you get. It is reality.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's we won't spoil it. I know listener Dick Gruner, he said it was the best indie he saw this year.
Oh, wow.
He was really excited.
Mike Williamson liked it, which is kind of weird because
you can't really use him as a barometer.
I will say this, though. I had doubts that any film should play before Possession, and I still do. I'll say this. No, because like Charlie, I was talking to...
Because of the lead actress.
Yeah, it holds up, but if you've never seen Possession, the problem with that movie is so ridiculously devastating on all levels of how you view a movie or even what a movie is, that it was just funny because Charlie, who works at Jump Cut, he had to close up early so he could make it to this event. I let him close. He watched Starry Eyes, came up to me after, man, Starry Eyes is so great. And then he sits down to watch Possession afterwards. He just turned to me and goes, I don't even remember if there was a movie before that. Like, I don't even think I'm going to go to the movies again this year because my brain is just fried from.
Wow.
And Morgan said he wanted to punch me in the face as soon as it ended. Literally, he said, because I want to punch you. And I couldn't tell if it's because he hated it or hated how it made him feel.
He'll have his chance next week.
Morgan was sitting behind me. He and Joe Wicker, who's one of his production partners, were sitting behind me. And I can't tell if he liked it or not. He just kept saying, I kept hearing gasps.
Yeah.
And I was sitting with my friend from grad school, and Sean Keller was right behind us too. And I was loving all the reactions because every so often I'd hear what? Yeah. And it was always when she was doing like her little weird speeches where she goes on about the Sisters of Faith and Chance. And she does it a couple times throughout the movie, but then I would just hear what? It was great.
I still am thinking what, and I've seen it a bunch of times.
Wow.
Yeah.
But it hasn't lost any of its power. It's the kind of thing on big screen it's still it has so many levels. I don't even know what it is. It's like how something like that even exists in cinema is amazing to me. Like how somebody makes a movie on that level with all these like performances that are all so big, and somehow you still walk out of it going, that felt real, even though it's not. It's so heightened. So it's very unusual seeing it again, and it's great to see something that holds your love.
Someone I was talking to on the way out summed up the reason they were paired together like this. Starry Eyes is about doing anything to make it in Hollywood. Possession is about making anything to fuck Isabella Johnny.
Doing it. I see. No, I think the only comparisons I only saw about 2 or 3 shots. Definitely that the performance of the lead actress in the first one is meant to be pretty extreme. And it's a great performance, but it's not like a Johnny's. And then
there's a lot of writhing.
And there's a couple shots where it follows her walking down the street kind of going crazy. And they actually, the scenes that worked the least for me in Starry Eyes, it felt a little put on. It maybe felt like it was trying to be possession in a moment.
That's where it kind of lost me is she had been like on the floor, can't even stand up. And then somehow in the next scene, she's like sprinting down the street to go like kick ass.
But anyway, we won't ruin anymore. But people put that on your list for real. Like
it's good.
That in terms of the indie horror of this year, that will be top 5 material for sure.
Okay.
So
what else have you seen, Bekah?
Okay, I did a whole bunch of events this weekend. So in addition to going to Beyond Fest and hanging out with this guy, I was at Days of the Dead most of the weekend, which I was kind of nervous thinking that no one was going to show up this year, Days of the Dead Los Angeles, because they held it at the LAX airport. Like it was at the Marriott next to the airport.
That's the only reason I didn't go. I cannot go down
And see,
there.
that's what I kept thinking because I was like, I don't want to schlep my shit down to the airport. But I got to say, it was a decent show. Like there was a big crowd there on Saturday. And I mean, Sunday was a little slow, but Sundays are always slow at conventions. That's just kind of the way it is. Pick one, damn it. Sorry, Elric's debating beer choices. But no, Saturday, it was packed. And I mean, and what was great was a lot of the people had just flown in for this. So like, they weren't like the LA locals. Like that's what always drives me crazy about Monsterpalooza is it's pretty much like going to hang out with the people that I hang out with every other night of the week.
But just for $20.
Now for $20.
With great art around.
In a cool room.
I think it's amazing.
I don't care about people I hang out with at Monsterpalooza. I care about the stuff there.
Stuff there. But no, this was actually kind of cool because everybody that I ran into there was from out of town. Like all of the fans there were from out of town. And
any Killer POV listeners?
A lot, actually. I met a lot of them.
I met one on Monsterpalooza I forgot to tell you about. Somebody I hadn't met. And then I met him again at Beyond Fest.
That's awesome.
It'll come to me, the name.
But the coolest thing there was Clive Barker came. Clive Barker signed for about 4 hours.
How's he looking? Is his health good?
He actually looked okay.
Good.
And I mean, Mark Miller was there, who I absolutely love. And I got to talk to him about Cabal and everything that they've got going on right now and Clive's new art show. And they were selling his art there, which is just...
There was no screening of the new Nightbreed or anything?
No. But I'm sure that there will be coming closer to the dates.
No, there's one at Spectre Fest at Cinephiles soon. But I know somebody wrote about it today. Was it Ryan? Somebody posted today that they saw it and that it improved the ending or something.
Yeah.
I'm anxious to see it.
I'm curious. Yeah.
But it was an amazing time. I mean, the fans that were there for Clive were so ridiculously just engorged in Clive's work across the board. I posted a picture on Facebook where this guy had created an actual lament configuration like the cube, and it did all the moves. I've never actually seen, and it was made of magnets and wood.
How did they do it in the movie?
It was ridiculous.
How are they? What were the actual ones that moved?
I've actually played with them. They actually had multiples. So Gary Tunnicliffe was the guy who designed the cubes, and if you go visit his shop in North Hollywood, he'll let you kind of see them and mess around with them. But they had multiple different cubes. So like one might do 2 moves because that's pretty much all they can do. Because if you think about how the properties of wood, it can't do all of them because you'd be literally standing there with like a pile of shrapnel. The guy that I met this weekend had created it with hinges and magnets, and he had to it took him a while. It wasn't like a smooth move in between. But like the ones that Gary created, they have different ones for each movie depending on what they need them to do. So like one was made really light and they attached monofilament to it so they could pull it and it would roll across the floor. Some of them are heavy or weighted.
Did you ever find out how they got the CD and the CD Cenobites Head in Part 3, your favorite movie of all time?
I'll have to ask Gary.
Okay. But did he do 3? I don't know if he did 3. I have no idea.
I think he did most of them. We should have him on the show at some point.
That's when it jumped the shark from. It was that character that jumped. It was like the DJ characters. Like, come on.
Yeah, some of the people there were actually dressed up as Cenobites, and I mean, it was like obscure ones that I'm even like, I don't have a clue what film that's from. So yeah, there were some diehard people there, and I met a whole bunch of Canadians that had flown in just to meet Clive, and yeah, it was a good show.
Yeah, you're talking about a great artist who won't be out there in the public that much. He really is like one of the great artists and writers and creators. Yeah.
So that was absolutely amazing. And then right before, I went from Days of the Dead, drove back to Burbank to go to the Delirium signing at Dark Del, and then left and went right back to Days of the Dead. So it kind of, my day was punctuated. But I went to the Delirium signing at Dark Delicacies on Saturday afternoon just so I could get to
just to screw me over.
Just to screw you over.
She said she would text me when she was going, and so I was going to wait, and then the time passed. Oh, I forgot, and I missed out.
So I'm your alarm clock dude?
You were my alarm clock. That day you were.
No, it was chaos because I was driving from the airport back to Dark Del and then had to leave by 3 o'clock to get back to the
I wanted to see
airport,
Jeff Combs just to say hi.
He was charging. That was the weird thing. Yeah, I mean, when you do signings at Dark Del, no one charges. That's just kind of the thing. And it was weird because it was
he the only one charging?
Well, for the magazine?
He was charging for everything.
Oh, okay. Because usually they'll sign whatever the event is for.
Yeah.
So if it's for the issue, they'll sign that. But sometimes people bring their pictures.
That's surprising.
That's kind of lame.
But I mean, I went to see Chris because I was so excited. Chris Alexander was in town for like 12 hours.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah.
So I got to go. I got to see him. We got to hug a few times and catch up briefly.
Too.
Where'd you see him?
I was at a wedding that day, so congratulations to Blake and Phelan. And the wedding was kind of early in the morning, and then the reception was most of the afternoon, and I left. And I figured, man, it's hours after the signing, but I'll stop by Dark Delicacies anyway. And sure enough, he was still standing there talking to Del. So I caught him just before he left, which was great.
That's great. So, and then I think David Dakota took him out for like a night on the town or some craziness. They went to like a Mexican joint. It was fun. Yeah. So I wish I could have gotten to see him more. So we got to get Chris back into town.
This is the most LA show that we've ever done.
I know. Well,
we're just name dropping.
I think, but this is going to this is how October is going to be.
All right, let's bring. Yeah.
That's the reality. Is October is just going to be like.
We need to bring the fan in Kansas back into the show.
I saw Godzilla, the new one.
Okay.
I don't know.
I haven't seen it. I'm probably going to watch it.
I haven't seen it either.
But don't you think, I'm guessing one of the reasons I'm kind of dragging my heels is like, I feel really stupid for missing on the big screen.
So do I.
A movie like that is probably not going to play well.
I'm waiting for the 3D version, and I'll just watch that.
I mean, I did feel stupid for missing it on the big screen, but the reason I didn't see it on the big screen is everybody told me it sucked and don't waste my money.
Really? I thought a lot of people liked it.
Most of the people
I thought it was very divided.
I'll call mixed. I'll say mixed. But usually if it's divided, like when I first heard it was coming, that was like I'm seeing it 3D IMAX, take my money, let's go. Yeah. But then as soon as people started saying, it's just not that great, then I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to drop $35 on 3D IMAX to go check it out for a night. So, I saw it on my TV, and I'm going to give it a meh. Did
it get exciting towards the end or not? That or Pacific
Rim?
Even.
Pacific Rim.
Really?
Wow, yeah.
I got a
feeling. Okay. But yeah, I'm gonna catch it on 3D.
Maybe I'll watch. I might even watch it in the next couple of days. I'm just curious. Yeah. Is the stuff, I know that I've heard that he's not in it that much and all that, but is the actual stuff with people and scientists and Bryan Cranston, is that interesting, or is there a story there?
Well, see, Bryan Cranston, I got to say, he's only in the film for like the first third. and then he's gone. And it killed it for me because then you're left with two guys. It's a guy who I didn't even know and Elizabeth Olsen.
Yeah, the kick-ass kid.
Yeah, the kick-ass kid and Elizabeth Olsen. And I got to say, Elizabeth Olsen bored the crap out of me in this one. I usually like her, but in this one I was like...
We'll be fine. Don't worry. She's just talking girl talk. That's just like, don't worry about that.
No, I mean, it was not an exciting film for me. And Bryan Cranston was like my favorite part of it because he was playing the kind of, paranoid scientist. You've got to believe me. There's something going on.
Yeah. Well, he's just great. In general,
it was just quick.
Yeah, the Cranston.
I wanted him in there more, and more Cranston and more Zilla. It was lacking in both.
And it's having a sequel? Has it already been?
Yeah. They're going to make another one where they're going to bring other monsters in now. Apparently,
well, there was
franchise.
other monsters in it. I mean,
like the well-known ones.
Okay,
are
good.
Or for
a crossover would be cool.
My daughter will like that.
Well, I think who did it? Was it Legendary? Yeah, no, Legendary. I think they're implying that because they announced at Comic-Con they're doing Skull Island, the King Kong prequel. So I feel like they're gearing up for a Godzilla King Kong sort of crossover at some point.
Okay.
Was there anything else you saw?
I saw Resolution, but
which one?
Have you never seen it?
I'd never seen it. I didn't see it before we did the show on it, and it was on Netflix, and I watched it at like midnight last night.
Oh, that's late to watch that one.
Yeah,
it's more of a thinking.
It is.
Film.
It is, and I think that if I'd watched it earlier in the day, I might not be as critical. But I was very much like. It annoys me when people shoot digitally and then fake it to look like film. That drives me crazy.
What do you mean fake it?
Like there are scenes where they're like, it looks like the film's being burned.
Oh, yeah. But I think that's more about the idea of the
giving you the idea that
you're watching something.
You're watching them pre-recorded, and then at the end, I kind of wanted to see what they were looking at. I was like, "So your big climax is a crane shot?"
Yeah, I mean that. Literally, my only complaint with that movie is the last second of it, and it can be justified. But I've seen Lost, and it's exactly the same when they look at smoke monsters.
I was just like, man,
I really like the chemistry. I really like the two leads. I like that movie. It's a good movie.
No,
I've heard their new movie. A lot better.
I love the concept.
Yeah, I can't wait to see Spring.
And by the way, back to before I finish on the guest, I want to echo one thing that Rob said. I'd say it might be the best leap of any indie I've seen in years.
Oh, from your next
to this, and any of the films Wingard had made, it's one of the biggest leaps I've seen.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because it doesn't feel like an indie anymore. It feels like a big film, even though it probably was still pretty cheap. It felt like a big movie, and it's really fun. So I can't sing the praises of that one enough.
When does it come out?
It's out.
It's out now.
It finally came to Sherman Oaks. I saw it on theaters. It came out. Yeah, I've got to say, unfortunately, and one reason I will keep harping on now is there wasn't a lot of people in there.
Yeah,
it was like 6 people in the theater.
Definitely haven't. I mean,
I would go so far as to say maybe they should have embraced the horror elements a bit more in the marketing and said this is actually a horror film instead of just we don't know what it is. It's just called The Guest. You know what I mean? I don't know. I don't know what the target for that is.
Yeah, it's tough. Know what I mean. It's tough. I mean, because you don't want to give anything away.
Exactly. But you will not have more fun. So that's all I can say.
Right. Okay, I saw a couple of things I wanted to talk about really quickly. I usually every October I like to break out Candyman, and we of course mentioned it as part of the '90s topic last week. I did the unthinkable. I did a Candyman trilogy.
I don't think I've even seen 3.
They kind of plummet, don't they?
Yeah, 3 could be one of the worst movies
Who directs that
ever made. Tori Meyer. I wrote it down. But anyway, first one from '92, still a classic.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
Everything about it really holds up. What was fun was I got to listen. I wanted to learn a little bit more about the movie, so I watched them with all the commentaries. Bernard Rose did that one, which I just discovered. Tony Todd has reunited for the first time in 21 years with Bernard Rose. He's doing a Frankenstein movie right now that Tony is in with him.
Now, is this one thing about Bernard Rose I'll say is I think he's one of those great directors who, I don't know why his career... Like suddenly he was making big movies and made Immortal Beloved, which was great and big. And that made total sense with Candyman because they're both kind of classical love stories. And then suddenly the next thing was shot digital. Well, the next one I remember was Ivan's Ecstasy with Peter Weller and stuff. And it's really good, but it's shot on like lo-fi digital camera, very small movie. And no one had really heard of it. And then I kind of just never saw his name again until recently, some sort of found footage thing that didn't look very good. And it feels like to me like he's a director who, had the potential to be like this great filmmaker. So
I don't know specifically what happened. Maybe, maybe he's very British. So maybe
maybe it didn't work in America.
And did a lot of work back there. But, you know, the first one, in terms of a lot of the horror films that came out in the 90s, it's definitely got to be one of the best, if not the best.
I think it might be.
It's pretty great. And I mean, it's funny because even he thinks that the first half of the movie is better than the second, because it's like once you introduce Candyman and see him, he's like, it's so hard to sustain the movie for you know, because now the cat's out of the bag. And up until then, it's like Virginia Madsen, it could be not. But I still think it's really solid. And if you haven't seen it in a while,
the romance really works.
It does. It's
really otherworldly romance. There aren't many movies that work like that. Like if somebody had a romance with Freddy Krueger, it wouldn't have worked.
No,
you know?
And also, you know, it's interesting because the time period of the movie was 92, and I was doing a little research and hearing Bernard Rose's commentary. You know, this is the whole basis of the story has a lot of racial undertones, and this is when the Rodney King incidents were happening, or the riots. So it's interesting that they kind of were pushing buttons, because in the news there was this whole racial tension going on. But classic movie. I rather like the second one a lot. It wasn't one I saw when it came out. I saw it much later and was pleasantly surprised by how solid it was.
That's Bill Condon from
Bill
Gods and Monsters,
Condon,
right?
who did. And here's what I learned about this from Bill Condon's commentary. Number one, Bernard Rose did write the first draft for Candyman 2, which they never used, and he based it on the Midnight Meat Train.
Wow.
Because he didn't know how to make a sequel to Candyman. He had no idea. So he's like, well, I'll just take another one of Clive's stories and just make it into a Candyman sequel. So there's a script out there somewhere of Candyman 2 by Bernard Rose as the Midnight Meat Train, but with Candyman in it.
Here's a question
that never actually happened.
How did Clive feel? I've never really heard Clive's thoughts on the original Candyman, Bernard Rose in general.
That's not one that
was he
Clive
really
talks
happy
about
about it because he didn't direct it?
No, I think Clive really loves the first one a lot, and he seems to like this. You know, from what I understood from Bill's commentary, he likes the second one too. First one's interesting because if you go back and read the short story The Forbidden, it's very different from, you know, Bernard added, you know, he wasn't an African American in the story. It took place, you know, in England, and they switched it to Chicago. And also, I mean, they implemented the Bloody Mary legend, you know, say Bloody Mary in the mirror. These are all things that Bernard added to it. And Clive was all for all of it. He's like, oh, this is all interesting stuff. Especially, I think Clive really appreciated the backstory, you know. And then Tony Todd was able to implement things like, well, I want him to be an artist and, you know, kind of like a rich guy, and had this, like, that whole backstory is all created for the movies.
Did he also do Paper House? Was that his film before Candyman?
Yeah.
So that's another.
That's
another one. So that's what I mean by those three
House.
films. Between that and A More to Beloved, to me, are the works of like a really great
Paper House
filmmaker.
has never even been released in the States. I mean, it like did a very limited VHS release decades ago, and then that's it.
Yeah,
it's
been
really
tough to
sad.
Find. But the first one's great. The second one's really cool. I mean, you know, there's certain things about it that aren't perfect, but I really appreciated it watching it again now. Third one, the worst, absolute worst.
Quick and dirty sequel.
Is that the last one?
It's the last one they made. It was, you know, a different company produced it. Even Tony's not happy with it. And, you know, the problem is, you know, you can't go from Virginia Madsen, who's a great, you know, Oscar-nominated actress, to Kelly Rowland, who did the second one, to Donna DeRico, who I'm sure is a nice gal, but she's a Baywatch gal. That's not a fact. She was on Baywatch.
Yeah.
And
which
she
is kind of an indication of it being a quick and dirty sequel.
She can't hold the movie. It's just not good, which is a shame because it's a great franchise and it's tainted by a very awful third one.
And was it just made as a cash grab or to keep the rights? Or
I really don't know. It could be a rights thing. I mean, one of the things I learned in my research was that right now, the biggest issue with making a sequel or a remake is that the rights are all over the place. So there's like 3 different people fighting for the Candyman rights. So that might have been just one of those movies where like, let's make it to maintain it, you know, the rights or whatever. But yeah, so there's that. I strongly recommend checking out the first 2 again. And really quickly, I started delving into the Vincent Price box sets that Scream Factory put out.
Those are gorgeous.
I watched The Pit and the Pendulum, which is great, directed by Roger Corman, written by Richard Matheson. And it's great because as they say, you know, and I think in the intro, you know, all the Edgar Allan Poe stuff is their third act, and they have to figure out a whole movie to lead up to the third act, which is The Pit in that sense. And as soon as it ended, I debated watching another Vincent Price movie, but instead I threw on Stuart Gordon's Pit and the Pendulum because I hadn't seen that in years.
It's really extreme, that one. It's pretty fun.
I just found that. I was cleaning out my DVDs a couple of weekends ago. I'm kind of purging a few, trying to shrink down so I can fit them all on one wall. And I found the Stuart Gordon box set, and I was like, I've never seen this before. It's on my need to watch stack right now.
You have to. Okay. I mean, they're totally different. The only thing they share in common is they did the same thing, which is they need the pit in the third act. They need to incorporate the Edgar Allan.
He's like the
story.
Mad Monk, right? Like the Spanish Mad Monk and all that. I remember that.
Lance Henriksen is playing Torquemada during the Spanish Inquisition. So it's all about torture.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it's a very disturbing.
Yeah, it's a pretty nasty movie from my memory.
It's nasty, but there's so much humor in it, which, Jeffrey Combs is in, and he brings a lot of the humor to it. And I went on Twitter after saying, first of all, this could be the most romantic movie that Stuart's ever made, because the whole premise essentially is Lance Henriksen.
More than Castle Freak?
Yes.
I'm kidding.
Who, by the way, the lead, Antonio, plays the creature in Castle Freak as well. So it's a regular Stuart alumni. But no, it's a very romantic story about the lead girl, Maria, getting taken by Lance Henriksen and accused of being a witch, essentially because he's super attracted to her and he can't contain himself.
Wow, that's the same plot of Witchfinder General.
It's pretty insane.
Wow.
It's pretty insane. But and I think they topped the Corman one in terms of how they incorporate the pit into the third act. It's awesome.
Now, on the Stuart Gordon box set, it's got Pit and the Pendulum, Castle Freak, and then the last one is Stuart's film Deathbed, which I have never seen before.
Oh, wow. Yeah, well, he did a version of Deathbed.
It's a version. Yeah. It's not Deathbed, the bed that eats people one. It's like a new one. It's like a Deathbed remake.
He directed it?
Yeah, he directed a death movie. Yeah,
I need to watch it. It's on there. Possibly this weekend. Yeah, I'm gonna just blast through all three of them, and I'll report back on Stuart Gordon's Deathbed.
You should. Weird. But yeah, I if you haven't seen him, and the other thing I said was long before Eli, Stuart already did torture porn, because that's the whole premise of this movie is torture and kind of this underground, like this underlining like pornographic sort of Lance Henriksen's desire.
That was actually the topic of my master's thesis, was that torture had been done since the 60s, because even back then we weren't showing anything, but that entire Corman Poe cycle is all about torturing Vincent Price.
That's true.
That's all it is him writhing and going, oh, the smells, the sights, the sounds, I'm insane, you're killing me with your cat.
Because it's easier to have him do that than show it. It's cheaper.
And so, but you're working under the haze right there, so you couldn't have copious amounts of blood on screen. But instead you just have Vincent Price writhing. He's being tortured either way. So.
All righty.
And that was it. That's
it for me.
Sweet.
Villain Castle. Cool.
Yep. Time to get down to business.
It's Twilight.
It's Twilight time.
Kristen Stewart coming up.
Okay, so we are back here, and some of our most popular episodes tend to be the ones that are home video oriented. When we have the guys from Scream Factory on, you guys seem to really like that a lot and hear about how they operate. And I guess I wanted to have on for a long time that does some pretty amazing work for a company called Twilight Time. Once I found out kind of the ins and outs of this company, how they work, how they approach the films, I knew that he would make an intriguing guest. So the man behind Twilight Time is here, Mr. Nick Redman.
Well, thank you for having me, Rob.
No, of course. So I guess... Well, let's start with the reason that we officially met, because I've known of you. I've picked up Twilight Time titles in the past, but there's a new one that, well, not necessarily new, but there's one that you're about to put out again that I think our fans are going to be very, very interested in.
Well, that would be Fright Night, which took us by surprise in 2011 when we put it out. We'd only just started, and I think it was our third or fourth Blu-ray. And Sony had been very kind to us because the remake had just been made that year.
Yep.
So there was some traction with regard to Fright Night, but Sony decided that they didn't want to do it. And despite our fledgling, nature at the time, they said, "Would you like to take Fright Night?" And we said, "Well, sure. If you don't want it, we'll have it." But what we didn't know, because we had no real experience of the horror crowd, was how popular it would be. Because we were used primarily in that first year of 2011, the first year that we were actually, releasing stuff.
What was the first title you guys released?
The first title was John Huston's The Kremlin Letter, which is about as obscure as it will get.
Haven't seen that one.
And then and our first deal was made with 20th Century Fox, and they were kind enough to give us about 100 films. But these were films that were mostly classics from the 40s, 50s, 60s, and some from the 70s, but none that had any sort of contemporary cachet, not in that first batch. And so when Sony gave us Fright Night, along with other movies that they were giving us at the time, such as Major Dundee and Bell, Book and Candle and Covergirl, Fright Night kind of stood out a bit, like the proverbial sore thumb. So we released it, and we didn't know that people would want it. And in about 5 weeks, it had sold out. And of course, we got a grotesque number of complaints from people saying, "How dare you limit this?" And
horror fans complain? No way.
No way. We don't bitch about everything that
they're
goes
the most
on.
passionate people out there, though. You got to kind of admire that a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, we learned the hard way, and we said, well, our model for all of our films is 3,000 units. And we feel that we're being pretty straightforward when we say that we're limiting our runs to 3,000 units, because the other companies are also limiting their runs, but they don't tell you what the limit is. And you will see, stuff going out of print, even on Criterion, and it goes out of print because they run out and they realize that there is no reason to print it again. We said right off the bat, we would do 3,000 because all of the studio demographics pointed to the fact that for most catalog Blu-ray titles, 3,000 was not only enough, it was in many cases going to be more than enough. It also suited us because I've spent the last 21 years at 20th Century Fox running their catalog soundtrack program. And we developed the idea of doing 3,000 unit runs. It was really working for soundtracks. Since Blu-ray was not taking off in the way that the studios thought it would, we said, let's pick that magic 3,000 number. It works for soundtracks. It may very well work for Blu-rays, and for 90% of them, it does. We have now released about 108 Blu-ray titles. We've sold out of 19 of them, and out of those 19, only 3 of them have gone in a way that you would consider to be very fast. Those are Fright Night, Christine, Night of the Living Dead.
Wow,
Go figure.
There you go.
So those are the titles that we saw had a different kind of a base to the other classic titles. And so we thought, well, we can't really fundamentally change our model, but maybe we can tweak it a bit. And the way that we decided to tweak it is, well, with the Blob, we upped the run to 5,000. And we had sold 2,500 copies in about the first 5 or 6 hours, according to our distributors, SAE. And what we did then was, and we had sort of worked this out with them before, that we would then put a halt on it. We would limit it to 1 per person. When they went on sale, it was you could buy 3, because a lot of people still don't have internet, they don't have credit cards. And we get so many letters from people saying, I want to be able to order something from my aged friend, who doesn't know how to order anything online and blah, blah, blah. And I know that we get a lot of criticism because people scream scalper at us all the time, as if the world is entirely comprised of scalpers.
Well, I think it's largely because of the horror world and because
Yeah.
of things like Mondo posters and things that sell out in a minute.
And that's what we see.
Yeah.
I mean, I never would call Mondo scalpers by any means, but they put a poster on sale, say, here's 200 prints of it, and within 10 minutes, and the same thing happens with Fangos. I mean, that Scream Factory edition right there, we limited it to a 2,000, I think it was 2,000, 2,000. Within 5 minutes of it being on sale, they were on eBay for $50. And it's just what
It's
we
a
see
different
in the
kind of
horror
marketplace,
world.
yeah.
So because there's demand and fans are, kind of just, can't
Right.
wait to get this. I mean,
But I want to be clear about a few things because I didn't understand fully how Twilight Time worked until, and obviously it was a learning curve from your first release to now. But number one, technically your titles are only available through Screen Archives, that website, correct? It's one retailer that carries them. So if anyone's buying it on Amazon or eBay or whatever, they're not buying it from Twilight Time or you. It's only going through Screen Archives. That's the official way to get this stuff.
Yes. Screen Archives are our distributors, and also TCM, Turner Classic Movies, take a few, but they really only take a few, like 20 or 30 copies of each title. That's all they take. Screen Archives, we decided right off the bat that we were not going to go through the big box thing. We were not going to do Barnes & Noble. We were not going to do that because the brick and mortar stores, as you know, is a very, labyrinthine and not in this day and age, not a very successful way to go. And there are these things called returns, which are deadly. You can ship 6,000 copies of anything to Barnes & Noble and they'll be quite happy to ship 5,900 of them right back to you. So we said we're not going to deal with any returns. No returns. We won't have it. So our deal with SAE is a sweet one for them, and I've been working with them for over 20 years because they have been selling all of our soundtracks all this time. We will ship all the product to you. You pay us for what you sell, and you don't pay anything for something that doesn't sell. But you also don't return it. So in other words, they warehouse and vault it for us, and then we steadily sell through. And that's the way we've been doing it. Now, of course, another point of controversy with our model is that, fans say, well, why aren't your Blu-rays, $15 or $9.99 or $12.99? Ours are $29.95, which, as you all know, is the retail price of just about every Blu-ray out there. And many of them are much more expensive than that. But what's the point of having a recommended retail price if you don't stick to it? What's the point of saying it's $29.95 if you're actually going to sell it for $12? It doesn't make any sense. So we said $29.95. There are only 3,000. You can only principally get them from one place. That's the price. The price of the limited edition it's a fixed price. We can't discount. We can't avail ourselves of the big box discounts and things. And so and
that's not the perception of your company, because I remember when I think Bring Me the Head was one of the first ones. I was like, oh, I need that. I don't always need to own everything, but that was a film. And I asked somebody, who had just bought it, how much does it go for? And he's like, I think it's like $60 or something. And I was like, oh my God, $60. But then I went to your actual website and bought it for $29.95. Exactly. So he must have bought it from somewhere else.
Yeah.
That had already been scalped.
Yes.
And so you're right. Yeah.
Well,
there
again,
is some consistency.
I'm sure that there are people who are good old-fashioned scalpers. And to me, anyone that tries to buy concert tickets, I'm a sports fan. I'm always trying to get sports tickets to big events. I know how difficult it is to get them for the cover price of the ticket. But not everyone is a scalper. What they are, eBay has created a whole world of dealers. And they prey on people who don't know. I mean, can you understand the logic of people who are already buying the Blob for $70 or $80 from eBay when it is available at Screen Archives for $29.95? Are they just too lazy to Google the Blob?
I guess. I mean, if you are one of those people, shame on you. Do some research. No, but I mean, some people are less savvy than others and searching for things.
Yeah.
But would eBay be the first place that you went to buy anything?
No, not as a consumer. Definitely not.
No, I mean, I've got that Possession and Shock Anchor Bay DVD from a long time ago, and it's just come out on Blu-ray, and people are still selling that for like $120. I'm like, who wants that now?
I sold my copy.
I don't want that now.
Yeah, because the new one came out. I sold my copy, and it sold for like $75
it's a dark
on Amazon.
DVD. But people, it's just, I think people don't always know all the facts. And they obviously don't know all the facts about how you do it. Is there a reason why, besides the 3,000 units in general, is there also contractual, because a studio's giving you, are they wanting you to limit the run? Would they be fine if you did more than that? Or is that kind of also part of the deal making you have to do with studios on these titles?
Well, the standard deal that most, let's say, video labels do with the studio is that they will agree a royalty point for a theoretically unlimited run, which means that the studio has to get involved with accounting. In other words, the studio wants you to submit to them semi-annual sales reports. It gets very tricky because it means that the studio has to usually put somebody on that and take up time worrying about how many units did we sell of this, that, and the other. So when we went to them with the idea of the limited edition, it was music to their ears because we said, we will pay you in advance for the whole run. No accounting, doesn't take up anyone's time. There's no management required, which studios often say no to propositions because they can't afford to have someone else be taken away from the job that they are supposed to be doing to do some other job that they may deem to not be very financially rewarding. So we took all of that out of the equation.
Makes sense.
One of the reasons why they really wanted to do this in the beginning, it sounded simple. They knew that we were going to be simply targeting real sort of core collectors. We were not going for the Walmart dumpster divers. Those people have no interest for us, and they wouldn't buy our product anyway. Our stuff is not going to be $4.99 in Walmart. So we are targeting, I think, probably the same hardcore audience that used to make up what the Laserdisc market was in the early 90s. Also, my partner in the company, Brian Jameson, and I mean, we're sort of studio veterans. Brian had been at Warner's for 33 years, for the last 20 in the home video, senior, vice president of marketing for international Warners across the world. And so therefore we had a lot of studio knowledge. We have a lot of sort of inside knowledge about how things are done. It's easier for us to speak the language that they speak. We're not coming sort of off the back of a turnip truck and having to learn the dizzying, crazy ways of how a studio works. We've sort of been through all that. We've been through it for decades. We've done many, many, many studio projects. And so we're able to take shortcuts that perhaps other companies would have more trouble with. And that's really how it started.
How do you, I mean, the logical thing is you create a brand identity. Obviously, Scream Factory, who's an offshoot of a bigger, obviously, they're picking very much 80s classics or things like Halloween, and that's what they're building their fan base on. How, because this is so eclectic, is this your taste we're seeing, or is some of it being given to you as, hey, we have these titles, go to it? Or are there titles you guys are actively chasing because of your passion for said movie? I'm always curious how that
It's a combination of many things. And, we're always asked these questions, particularly on our Facebook page, and we try to be as responsive as we can. But I often wonder about whether we should really reveal the sometimes absolutely nutty decisions that go into releasing a film or not. I mean, take Mind Warp, for example, which was...
I was going to bring that up.
It's an old Fango picture.
Okay, an old Fango picture, exactly.
Yeah.
And so why did Mind Warp end up on Twilight Time, and why did Twilight Time do it? And I'm going to tell this story, which I haven't told before, because it is a perfect example of what we call a relationship project. It's a relationship project. Sony came to us and said, would you be interested in Mind Warp? We really like the director. He's a friend of ours. We can't do it ourselves. If you would take out Mind Warp, we'll give you something that you really want. Just do us a favor. And it also turned out that Steve Barnett, who is the director of Mind Warp, is a senior executive at 20th Century Fox, where I've been for 21 years. And I know Steve through the people that he works with. So it's a kind of an old pals thing where we said to Steve, we're going to put out Mind Warp because, oh, great, I thought no one would ever put out Mind Warp. So it was like, in a way, killing two birds with one stone. It was able to do people at 20th Century Fox a favor and also do Sony a favor and show that we will take one for the team if the film doesn't sell.
And how did it sell? Did it sell okay?
It's moving along.
I would put money on it that there'll be a spike Saturday morning.
Saturday morning.
Twilight Time at Mind Warp. Holy
I hope so. It's actually, I mean, it's not, we didn't think, oh my God, we're putting out some horrible film. We're putting out, we knew what we were doing from the beginning, which we were putting out a low budget film. And as you said, Fangoria, one of the, I think, 3 movies that Fangoria made. Isn't that correct? I think
we've done, we signed our name onto a couple since then. But yeah, we've definitely,
at that
time, the original 3. Yeah.
That was the first of the bunch, if I remember correctly.
It had like a fledgling Bruce Campbell in it.
I talked about it a few weeks ago because I watched it. And first of all, I love Bruce Campbell from that era. So it was nice to see him again back in the early 90s. But to me, what was impressive is I remember that as a direct-to-video Fangoria title on VHS in full screen. I throw on your Blu-ray and it's in widescreen. It looks fantastic, and I'm like, I can't believe Mind Warp looks this freaking good.
Well, Steve Barnett, the director, he was surprised too about. But Sony, this is their thing. Why they are the best in the business at restoration is that they really believe in vaulting all of their assets at 4K. So Grover Crisp, the head of Sony's asset protection program, treated Mind Warp in exactly the same way that he would treat Man for All Seasons or Oliver or any of the other big movies. That's just the way they are there. They do not discriminate based on box office,
which is exactly how it should be for true cinephiles. It's all relevant. Yeah.
I really feel that Grover and his team are great, and that's not to disparage anyone else, particularly my friend Sean Belston at 20th Century Fox. And I think Grover has the luxury of a budget, that they have said that they can, really sort of protect their assets, keep them for the future. Who knows what market will develop? Who knows what the next thing will be? As you know, Sony is thinking of moving into marketing 4K Blu-rays is the next step. So it's quite possible that that's the future of those sort of things. So Mind Warp, lowly Mind Warp, got treated exactly to the same level of care and attention that Sony would put on anything.
What's an example of one that you would have? What's an example of a title then that you would have chased or been something that you really felt passionate about trying to make sure you guys could deliver in that way?
Well, everything for me from Thunderbirds Are Go, which we put out, just pure childhood nostalgia, to something like The Way We Were, one of our favorite films. Something that meant something to you, something that's meaningful. Obviously, a lot of the great movies the studios have already put out on Blu-rays themselves. So we are sort of trying to identify a kind of a classy quality all across the map, everything from dramas to melodramas to comedies to science fiction. You know, we're saying we don't discriminate against any kind of movie. We'll do them all, providing they sort of fit into our rather loose Twilight Time
label
brand, you know.
Why do some of them fall? There's some films that just, it baffles me. The Blob, okay, I can kind of understand it. I'm surprised somebody didn't get to it
for
earlier.
horror films,
For effects, it's on another level. I'm surprised maybe, you know, at Scream Factory. But then there's things like Christine, which flat out makes no sense how that hadn't been already put to Blu-ray, because it's a classic looking, really, it's a great looking picture in general. I saw it on AMC or something recently, and I was blown away by how well made that film was.
Yeah.
And how do some of these films maybe fall through the cracks, or why isn't that released prior to Twilight Time? Do you know?
Well, it's hard to speak sometimes for studio policy. I mean, what usually happens in the studio setup, you know, let's take the home video division at, you know, X, Y, and Z studio. What you have are people whose responsibility it is to keep the program going, to find ways to make money. And I think in the home video division, for many years, they had it so easy because home video sold itself in a way. You know, you knew that once that craze for home video really hit, particularly in the advent of DVD back in the mid-90s, and the studios had managed to pull off quite a feat, which was to convert the American public from being renters to buyers. That hadn't happened before because the people that bought high-end Laserdiscs, they cost $100 or more, many of them. Criterion Laserdisc was routinely $125 back in 1989. So therefore, that was a very high-end kind of video file that could afford that. Everyone else was renting their, you know, tapes from 2020 or Blockbuster. And then when DVD came along, they found a way to price them right, and they converted a huge number of people into buying films and keeping them. That created a revenue stream for the studios that was astronomical, in many cases much more than the money that they were earning from theatrical releases of pictures. It really began to be the tail wagging the dog. And then, of course, like everything, there was a boom and bust, and the bust sort of happened in the 2008, 2009 sort of period. And then they sort of hit a brick wall. They don't quite know what to do. They think, shall we just sort of slow down and wait it out? Maybe it'll pick up again. Shall we concentrate on our brand new blockbusters? And so you have a lot of back and forth in the studios about what policy to adopt. And then, of course, that's when things start to fall, you know, through the cracks, because they, instead of releasing 300 or 400 or 500 catalog titles a year, they'll drop to 10. And those 10 are only going to be the biggest movies that you can imagine.
Yeah.
And studios think big. They can't think small. They're just not equipped to think small. So the idea of targeting, say, Christine or Fright Night to 10,000, let's say, hardy horror souls, it just isn't in their mentality. If they can't think of a way to sell 10 million copies, they just can't be bothered to do it. And in fact, that's what gave rise to their MOD programs, because their MOD programs for DVD only at present is a way to have, you know, an intern burn a DVD-R for somebody if they want it. They found a way to keep the costs way, way down, and to provide something to maybe in some cases just 100 or 200 people that might be interested in any given very obscure movie. I just want to go back to those three horror films again, because I got sidetracked. The way that we're tweaking it, as we said, 5,000 for The Blob and limiting it to one per person, so that I really feel that when that sells out, probably in about a week's time, that everyone that wanted one will have had a chance to get it. Because we're selling now about 250 copies a day, according to Screen Archives, and that will mean it will last probably for another 4 or 5 days, maybe. Whereas on the first day, you know, they sold close to 3,000 copies the first day, so you see how it slows down. And then because we felt that we had sort of inadvertently cheated people with Fright Night Christine, that we would put them out again. I feel it's legitimate to reissue these titles if there's something that we can do differently. In the meantime, they have come out, those other two, overseas. They've come out in a few other countries now. So those people that sort of want to still import them very cheaply can. We will still stick to our $29.95 price point. We will still stick to a 3,000 unit reissue run for Fright Night and Christine. But we are going to include a lot of new extras on Fright
that's
Night.
very cool.
Which is largely due to our friend Rob here, and also Ryan Turek and Tim Sullivan, all of whom have been very generous with their time and their resources to have basically dug up a lot of stuff, a lot of things that Tom Holland wanted to include that we couldn't have done first time round.
Hours of Fright Night stuff that I had has been given over for this release. So hopefully it'll all be on there.
We're going to try to get as much of it on as we can. We don't quite know what Sony will say, if anything, about it. You know, they've been at the beginning of our run with Sony. They seemed rather hardcore about not really wanting new extras produced, or they didn't really want to deal with clearing copyright on extras, things like that. Which is one of the reasons why Shout Factory, I think, backed out of a deal with Sony. I think I might be wrong, but I think they backed out of one because they were told that they couldn't do anything, that they would have to be bare bones. We're always taking, flack, as we say, for being quote unquote bare bones, but we always include isolated score. We always have an 8-page booklet. Every booklet has an essay by the lovely Julie Kiergo. And we've been recording our own commentaries. We've been, if anything is available, we've always ported over what was on the old DVD. And if I can convince someone to give me something, or even we have been known to pay a small amount of money for somebody's pre-existing extras, we will include whatever we can. And I think Rob, I had met Tom Holland a couple of times. He was very nice. He was quite proud and pleased of what we had done the first time round. I was sort of sorry for him when it went out of print so fast. There was sort of nothing that we could really do about it within our 3-year window. We felt that if we brought it back out again a year later, that would really be doing a disservice to the limited edition. It would be cheapening it, so we didn't want to do that. So we've waited until the 3-year window is up. And of course, coincidentally, 2015 is the 30th anniversary of the film. So now we've got a legitimate thing where we can say 30th anniversary special edition. Here's some things courtesy of Rob, Tim, and Ryan that we didn't have before, but now you can have. So sounds reasonable, I hope.
Yeah.
And I noticed some other on the this month list. There's 3
there's tons of
lesser known horror films.
Excited about The Believers. I love that
Believers,
film.
Audrey Rose, and
The Vanishing.
The Vanishing.
The one with Kiefer Sutherland.
which is the American
American
version, which is they're also available. I remember the Criterion put out the original,
Original.
and he just passed a couple weeks ago. And I think the original is one of the best films ever.
The original is
it's incredible, and the remake's an interesting film as well.
The remake is interesting, and I think one of the most interesting things about it is that George Sluza, directed both.
Yeah.
It's very unusual to have the same director remake his own work. And I think I don't believe that he was a victim of the studio telling him that, you've really got to make this different for American audiences. I think he thought that he would try to say something about America in it. And I think that's really what separates The Vanishing from Sporloose, which is what the first one is called.
And the one thing about the remake, I think, that does stand up is Jeff Bridges, a very different role for him. I think it's the only time really in his career he played a role like that, and I think it's a fascinating, him flipping the coin and being a professor. I think it's just if people haven't seen it, I think it's a very interesting role for him because he's the Big Lebowski to most of us now.
Yeah, the original and this one are still two of the most haunting films I can think of. They just disturb me like mad.
And Audrey Rose is really interesting. I remember I had a film I would love to see somebody put on Blu-ray. That I only became familiar with for the first time last year was called The Haunting of Julia, otherwise called Full Circle. And then I saw Audrey Rose quite soon after, and there was definitely parallels I felt to the type of movie they were.
Yes.
But Haunting of Julia, I don't know anything about the rights. I just was really affected by it. It was a haunting film, and Audrey Rose obviously has a little more sellability because also Anthony Hopkins and elements like that. But I don't know if you've seen Full Circle.
Not only have I seen it, I produced the soundtrack album. Actually,
okay, good. Then we're in good company.
Many years ago, the score is by a good friend of mine, Colin Towns, who's a great British composer, and it's a terrific score. And it's a very little known film. But
I don't know, and I don't know why that is. I don't know much about it. I just saw it on theatrically, and I couldn't believe there was such an effective slow burn film that I had never really been aware of. And I assume that's availability. It just kind of isn't really available. I think it was on Netflix streaming, and it didn't look great in that quality, but
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know to whom to go to try to license it.
Maybe I should investigate and send you and start harassing you with emails.
So a couple of quick things I just wanted to, for my own personal understanding. So something like, the way I don't fully understand how licensing deals work with studios and stuff, but because you're doing such a low run of it, you're licensing titles by paying up front for, say, $3,000 or whatever it is. Whereas maybe in theory, I guess Scream Factory will license it for X amount of years.
I think that they do a years. And I know that they're also very limited on what they can do with it, which I assume you are too. Like they can only release it to Blu-ray, but they can't show it in a theater and they can't put it on VOD.
Which is why some of their stuff doesn't come with the DVD because they only have Blu-ray rights.
Yep.
And things like that.
And I know that there's weird stuff with title rights with them too, or at least there was with some of them.
Do you only do Blu-ray?
We started off doing DVD, and then we switched to Blu-ray.
Yeah,
we've only done one title that was in both formats, and that was a film called The Egyptian.
The Egyptian.
I think we very quickly determined within the first year that DVD was not where it was at for us. Mm-hmm. That our niche was Blu-ray. I know that other labels still persist, including Criterion, with doing DVDs and Blu-rays. But for us, the extra work and the extra cost, and the fact that we're only selling it through one retail outlet, just maybe people still pick up DVDs in Walmart, but they wouldn't do it from Screen.
Well, it seems like the collector idea has changed. Like if I'm going to own Walkabout, and I remember buying Criterion's DVD and then have since regretted it because I would now only want it on Blu-ray. I think people who are going to pick up a title of that kind of obscure nature are going to want to watch it the best way it can possibly look.
Otherwise, that's what I think.
And your average person doesn't even want to own that film in the first place.
What's the other title of that one?
Which one? No, Walkabout. Just Walkabout.
Really?
Nick Rogue's. Yeah, Walkabout.
Okay.
But I'm just using that as an example. I know Razorhead was another one I remember thinking, and Night of the Hunter. Films that I remember, you own them on DVD and they look okay and it's fine. And then suddenly they release Blu-ray and you're like, oh, well, I need to now. I think Criterion's is like $39.95 when you buy that on Blu-ray.
Right.
Night of the Hunter was.
Unless you wait for their half-off sale, which I...
That's true. But and then it might be worth it to you because you're a collector. It just depends. Yes. But obviously, that's not a person who walks into a mall and just goes, "Oh, cool, this is here."
If
maybe
I do,
a Barnes and Noble.
They're like throwaway titles. If I go to Walmart, that's where I buy I've never heard of it before, but the cover looks cool.
Yeah.
But if Night of the Hunter Blu-ray pickup, was like waiting in line for it to go on sale type stuff.
No, it's very different. But I feel like by making it clear that this is a company that only does the high end, it feels like a little above Criterion in that, it's Twilight Time, which can be a bad. I don't know if that sounds snobby, but it kind of, you can make it work for
Criterion. I mean, let's face it, that's the Rolls Royce.
Gold standard.
They're the Rolls Royce of the business, and they've been around. People forget they've been around now for 30 years.
Right.
And they've always been about quality, and you can't fault what they do. I mean, and I remember them when they were literally a boutique office in Santa Monica. I mean, that's where they used to be back in the late 80s. And I had a column for the Directors Guild of America magazine, and I used to review Laserdiscs. And of course, I reviewed many, many Criterion discs, and they were expensive. And it was difficult, I think, for them to really find any kind of a mass market with things that were so pricey. And so aimed at people that were clearly at a level of sort of video file that the average person just wasn't. It's like people who are audiophiles who have $100,000 stereos. It's a different world, and it doesn't really reflect, I don't think, the average person. So over the course of the last 30 years, I think everybody, including the studios, have been striving to find a way to make this affordable. Mm-hmm. But I firmly believe that the studios went too far and they shot themselves in the foot when they were trying to brand Blu-ray after the Blu-ray HD DVD wars were over and Blu-ray won. They then made them all loss leaders. And it didn't help, I don't think, that when you could buy, let's say, a Blu-ray of Bullet for $8.99 and the DVD was $19.99. I didn't understand I couldn't understand the mentality behind that. They should have priced the Blu-ray, not like Laserdisc, but they should have said, Blu-ray is going to be the best way you can see any of these movies.
Right.
Why would you charge half what you're charging for the DVD? We know what the logic was. The logic was, this is how you lure them in, and then we'll start raising the prices. But unfortunately, they couldn't do that.
So are they all still loss leaders? If you go into like a box store to try to buy Blu-rays, are they all still kind of ranking in that price range?
I think you could probably argue that any studio release that you might buy from Amazon, even if it costs you $19.99, is a loss leader, because when you factor in what Amazon is taking out of the deal, there's nothing left for the studio. I mean, any studio would have to sell millions of copies of, Guardians of the Galaxy, just as a one random example, when they're only getting pennies back from their Blu-ray and DVD sales. I don't know how it doesn't work that way. It used to work when they controlled the market when it was rental, because, they used to charge a lot of money for rental companies to be able to rent their movies. The technology has gone so far, so fast, and now it's all out of control with streaming and downloading and everything. And I think we're still trying to figure out what to do. I think they're all trying to figure out what is the right thing to do. And I think that one of the reasons why physical media is going away, and I know that there are people that resist the idea that it is, but it really is going away. And it's going to do exactly what we said it would do 3 or 4 years ago, which is to default to a purely niche collector's market, and that all of the releases would be handled by third-party distributors, meaning it would not be the studios themselves, it would be the Criterions, the Shouts, the Images, the Mill Creeks, and everybody like that, and us. We jokingly called this thing Twilight Time because we thought it would last a year, because it was the twilight time of the business. That's why that was what we. That was our little joke going in, and
little did you know.
And what we have found is that we were both right and wrong. We were right about the fact that the studios would back away, but we were wrong about the fact that people's interest in Blu-rays would go away as quickly, because there is quite a number of people who really do love the idea of having a Blu-ray that they can look at, that they can put on their shelf, that they can flip through the booklet. And these people are resistant to streaming, at least they are at the moment.
I am, and I'll tell you why. Because literally, I'm still a collector. I need to physically, and Blu-ray is, if you have the right appropriate setup, Blu-ray is the best looking of the bunch. There is not a single streaming example, whether it's Netflix or whatever it is, that at some point it doesn't freeze, the quality lessens. Like, I've never had a perfect streaming experience. Wow. It's not there.
Well, also
yet.
VOD and streaming sometimes seem like two different words, even though they are meant. Because if I rent a movie for $6.99, that's a brand new release, and often I'll do that with HD a brand. Or whatever. Exactly. Okay, I've never really had issues with
problems.
That. But with Netflix, I feel like it's getting worse and worse by the week when I watch things that way, and it turns me off. I'll only probably see something, just something kind of crappy, or a TV show or something where the quality actually doesn't matter.
Right.
But I mean, I'm an avid VOD. Like, if, The Blob comes out, I will buy that on Blu-ray just because it's an older film and it's one that I feel I need to own. But like the new Godzilla, nope, went straight to Amazon for it. Just downloaded
that could be,
it.
that could be hitting on something, because I think these older titles, people with theatrical experience going down, and there's less repertory theaters left, and New Beverly opens again today, and it's going to be one of the last remaining. What happens is we want to share those films. Those are the films you share because you have memories about them, whereas new films, you don't know what you're going into. And I think I could still see that collector market staying strong for those kind of titles, but I think the movies being made now won't have... So 10, 15 years from now, I don't know if we're all going to be going, we want to buy the nice Twilight Time version of Godzilla by then. I don't think a lot of these films anyone's going to care. And I that's speaking, I can't speak for that next generation, because maybe they will care. I don't think so. I've been around enough people 15 or so years younger than me who just do not care. If it's on a computer and they can push a button and they have all their files, that's because that's the world they're born into, and it makes total sense.
Yes, and I think you're right. And I think one of the things, I notice it with my own daughter, who's 21, is that they don't tend to feel the nostalgia that we felt. When we came out of a movie that we loved when we were kids, we thought, oh man, what a great experience. You told everybody about it. You went back, you saw it again. and then you couldn't wait to see it on television. I mean, that was your only option that you had in the pre-video days. And having watched my daughter grow up, and she's interested in the media world, and yet I can't think what would she want from her own childhood to hold and watch and care about. And outside of Peter Pan, I can't think of one thing. And she's not alone in this. You know,
right.
they come out of a movie, they will go, but they'll come out of a movie theater and it's gone. You know, any memory of the movie has already evaporated by the time.
Because there's
you're on the
so
street.
much more media now.
Yeah.
I mean, we all have phones in front of us that we can look at and connect to ideas or, you know, IMDb in seconds. And that really does change your entire physical reaction to media.
What I found really interesting, and Elric, I don't know if you've had this with your kids. My daughter is now 2, and she can just now at this point kind of operate the remote control, and she doesn't get it right, and she messes it up, and then I have to reset everything. But if she's flipping through channels to find a TV show, she gets really frustrated, and she'll say, net, and she wants me to put it on Netflix because there she's got the little icons and she can go exactly and find Daniel Tiger or My Little Pony, and it's all there in one place for her. So she gets
That's
really
how McDonald's
angry.
got kids. Don't forget. Give them a toy. Give them a colorful toy, and they'll eat it forever.
But she gets really angry if I just hand her the remote and it's on television because she doesn't want to flip through the channels.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It is really different. It's so different. I can't even imagine where they'll be. I mean, my son was using an iPad at about 1.5 with games and learning and the tactile nature of touching things is so different than what we grew up with.
Marnie understands some of the games on the iPad more than I do.
Yeah.
Like there's this one like raise a pony or something. It's about like raising a horse, but she knows like where everything is. And
Twilight Time needs to get into
18
children
months.
apps. That's what the market you are missing out on. Leave Her to Heaven, the app. I'm genuinely curious. What are the best-selling titles that, like, say, the non-horror ones that do? I mean, because you have some. To me, I'm a real cinephile, definitely beyond horror, and so I look at titles like The Mechanic, and I get excited about Leave Her to Heaven was the one I was. I always thought Leave Her to Heaven was one of the best-looking films I'd ever seen in my life. You know,
you got Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia. That was when my husband was like online, waiting for that one to release so that like the moment it came on sale, we had that.
Well, and some of these movies, I also really like that Criterion just put out Love Streams, because some of these movies are the films that I actually think are I think Bring Me the Head is actually Peckinpah's best film, but largely was not considered that for a long time, and kind of they get overlooked. And I think Love Streams was Cassavetes' best film, and largely no one ever got to really see that film. I think it's. I mean, to me, it's really important work when they're then represented so well. And obviously, they hit a niche, but I don't know if everyone cares. So I am curious, like, what of the titles have done really well for you guys, and what as a title maybe that surprised you by?
Well, Leave It to Heaven, for example, is one. I think that it hasn't quite sold out, but there are only about 300 or 400 copies left, which for a title from 1945, very unusual. The Big Heat, which is a classic noir, that sold out for us. Burt Lancaster and The Train was very popular.
I haven't seen that. Have you seen The Swimmer?
I have seen The Swimmer.
That was another one of my favorite performances, and then Grindhouse releasing. Who at some point we want to get Bob Murawski here just to tell the story because it doesn't really fit with the rest of his films. No. But he has a story of being in Sony that is just like your story about friends doing favors, where my jaw dropped when he said, "This is how we're releasing The Swimmer," and I was like, "That I didn't know that could exist." You know, so it's unique.
Those are the funny stories. The Swimmer is a very unusual film.
Very unusual,
and I'm so glad that they did it. And I thought that their presentation was fantastic.
I really think they did it. They went on. I know his partner, who's the editor, also an editor. She put a lot of time into tracking everyone down, including Joan Rivers. People forget she was in the film in a small part.
Wow. So 70s action films, as you said, The Mechanic is doing very well.
Driver.
People like Walter Hill.
Driver's a great release.
Driver, and Hard Times, which was his first movie as a director. And we've got some more Walter Hills coming down the pike. He's been very good to us. We'd known him for a while. He actually played John Ford for us in a documentary that we made for Fox called Becoming John Ford. So he was the voice of John Ford, and he's a great guy. So it's always nice when his movies are popular. And for a guy of his generation, he's popular with the young Turks out there who are appreciative of good, solid action pictures.
Has anyone put out, and if I don't want to spoil anything if it's in your pipeline, but has anyone done Blu-ray of Extreme Prejudice?
They have overseas.
Okay.
That is one that we don't have it yet, but it's in a catalog that we are hopeful that we might get. So
because that's one of those films I saw it on TV, and I remember when it ended, I'd never heard of it, and even though I know a lot of Walter Hill's film, and I couldn't believe the performance and chemistry between the two leads, Powers Booth and Nick Nolte, is amongst the best I've ever seen.
Wow.
Like two people playing off each other. I mean, Powers Booth even tips it, and that's hard to believe with Nick Nolte at his prime. That is Powers Booth next level and a great movie. So I hope you do get it. Yeah.
In terms of you mentioned Walter Hill, and I know you had told me off record, well, not off record, but that Robert Zemeckis got very involved in Used Cars, which was one of your releases. How often do the directors and the filmmakers get involved with the Twilight Time releases?
Well, it's happened a few times. And again, I think partly it's because of my partner, Brian Jameson, and the company, because of his longevity at Warner's. I mean, one of the great stories about Brian, I think not many people know, is that he was the only executive in the home video division at Warner's that Stanley Kubrick would speak to. So Brian had to basically do all of the managing of Kubrick's entire catalog for Warner's when they were released in any video format. So obviously when you have those kind of relationships with high-powered filmmakers over a long period of time, they can come back and do favors. So we've had a few. Randall Kleiser, for example, really wanted us to do the Blue Lagoon, so we said, okay, we did for him. And Bob Gale and Zemeckis really wanted Used Cars out, so they got involved, principally Bob Gale, but they both were very supportive of it. Oliver Stone, we have put out Salvador, we're putting out Heaven and Earth in December, which is a Warner Brothers title, and it's very unusual for Warner Brothers to license anything to anybody, and they wouldn't have licensed this to us if Oliver hadn't prevailed upon them to... because they weren't going to do it themselves, and he just wanted it out. So a filmmaker, high-powered filmmakers can definitely make a difference, and we're finding that we're getting, cold calls. We got cold called by John Gillerman, a name from the past, directed films like The Blue Max and the Bridget Raymargan. One of our very first Blu-rays was a film called Rapture, a 20th Century Fox film that had hardly had any release at all. And John Gillerman, who is now almost 90 years old, told us that Rapture was his own personal favorite of all the films that he had made, and could we please try to do it? And we were able to get it out for him. So,
that's neat.
So these things happen, and it's always encouraging when a filmmaker, really wants to help get something done because they personally want it as well. Luckily, touch wood, we haven't had the case where we've been shouted at by any filmmakers who haven't liked what we've done.
Well, I got the impression at the Blob screening that was fairly recent, and that Chuck Russell didn't even really realize anyone cared.
That's
the overwhelming vibe from his Q&A was like, I'm really shocked that you guys still like this movie or are really interested. And I think part of him not being less sure about doing Q&As and stuff was because he didn't know if it would be a positive thing, and the screening went gangbusters and Ryan was there, and so then was probably a lot easier to get him to want to do a director's commentary, because it must be exciting to
and it's a
second life.
It was a really great commentary. I thought Ryan and he had very good chemistry. Ryan is very smart, knew exactly what to say to him, and I think directors are often surprised that people care about particularly their early work, because when a director like Chuck looks at The Blob, what he sees are all the things that he now is embarrassed about and would do completely differently if he could do it over again. And they forget sometimes that that film that they've made, which maybe is not that great to them, means a hell of a lot to somebody. Someone has been touched by it.
Because we're not watching that film now. We're watching it through the lens of how we first watched it.
When I was like 12 years old watching it, going, oh my God, the guy's arm fell off. And
because the effects are so incredible, and that's the one thing that did improve on the original. The original's incredible in its own right, but it's one of those things where you're like, I still don't, there's a gag in there where, and seeing it in the theatrical, I'm excited for the Blu-ray, but the gag where, through the basin, when it comes out and the guy's head goes through, no one in the room knew how that, I think I was half falling asleep because it was midnight, and I have a 6-month-old, but, and my eyes were shutting here and there, not because of the movie, but then suddenly that happened, and I was just almost like somebody just fooled me, like pulled the rug out, and I wouldn't have a clue. And
but
so
it's definitely affected some of the film tastemakers as well. Because I remember an interview with James Wan where he was talking about, because somebody asked, like, why did you pull Shawnee Smith back out to do that weird scene in Saw? And he was like, because of the Blob.
Yeah.
She was amazing in the Blob. I wanted to see what she was doing now.
Is there a scenario where you would do a contemporary film, or even would there even be a reason to do a contemporary film? I guess in the sense that I saw Under the Skin this year. I'm not sure if you saw that. And I remember when it first was out in theaters, there was all this talk that I don't know why that started because it's on Blu-ray now, but I'd heard that it wasn't going to be released on Blu-ray initially. I can't remember how I heard that. And I was like beyond gutted because I was like, that's such a gorgeous looking, unique, like otherworldly creation that I'd only want to have that on Blu-ray. And then now it is, thankfully. But thinking if a movie like that had fallen through, I could see that there would really be that same kind of collector's interest in certain titles that might not get Blu-ray because studios don't care about some of the titles. I can't think of any. I mean, that film, obviously, The Battery that we had talked about a lot, could have been something like that.
Yeah.
But has that come up at all yet? The idea of doing something more recent?
It's something that we've talked about. I mean, it's difficult, obviously, because we just don't have the resources, either financial or human, to be able to theatrically exhibit movies. And the way that you would most likely pick up new movies is go to film festivals, and those that fall through the cracks there and don't, that Harvey Weinstein doesn't want, the ones that he doesn't want, often get left behind, and they don't get any kind of release at all. So that's how it would have to start. But what we've learned is, and we licensed a series of British films from Channel 4, Film 4 in the UK. And they're all pretty well-known films. I mean, they're directed by, Ken Loach and some well-known people, and they've all got, name actors in them. And we really can't move them here at all. So it's almost like, releasing a film from the UK is, in fact, like releasing a foreign film. We're releasing in November a film called The Twilight Samurai from 2002, which was a Oscar-nominated for Best Foreign Film samurai picture by Yoji Yamada, who's an older generation a Japanese director, done an awful lot of great stuff. And as a result of taking out that, they offered us his movie from this year, from 2014, called The Little House, which has been playing at film festivals all over the world since last January when it premiered in Berlin. And so that is one that we'll probably take out in early 2015. But again, it's purely a sort of an adjunct to the fact that we already had The Twilight Samurai, which was a film that he was very proud of. So that's, again, a kind of a variation on the relationship thing that we were talking about earlier with Steve Barnett from Mindwarp.
Because it doesn't benefit you to have to promote a film that no one knows about, because you don't have the resources to...
Yeah.
If people don't know the 1996 British film Fever Pitch starring Colin Firth, I don't quite know how we would interest them in a 2014 film from the UK or New Zealand or Australia that didn't have any names in it at all and maybe was by a first-time director. And no matter how good the film might be, how would we persuade people to take a chance on it? Unless we could get the VOD rights that would go along with it, and maybe you tempt people with the VOD with the poor quality streaming, and then they would be interested in a Blu-ray.
It's interesting perusing these titles. It's always shocking to me when I see something I've just never heard of, and the one title I try not to watch trailers, but because I feel like I've seen most of Donald Sutherland's, that period. But The Disappearance, when I came across that title, I've never even heard of that title. And I know nothing about that film. I kind of read up about it, and it felt like it was exactly in my, Alan Pecula type. It felt like in that realm of work. But I don't know, is that a title that you guys looked for, or something that came on your plate?
Yeah, that one wasn't like through a studio, was it?
It was licensed from a company in the UK, actually. Okay. It was actually a UK-Canadian co-production. And again, I have to confess, it's a relationship movie. I interned for the producer of that movie when I was a teenager. I had always loved it.
I need to see that. That's one. Now, is that sold out yet or not?
It's not sold out. And again, it's probably one that we're struggling to push that one. Stuart Cooper, a bit of trivia about the director, he also directed a great movie called Overlord, which Criterion put out. But he is one of the Dirty Dozen. He's one of the 12.
Oh, wow. Okay, interesting.
That's pretty amazing.
But it is a good film, well worth checking out. Donald Sutherland is terrific in it, and it's very arty. It's written by Paul Myersberg, based on a novel. You know, Paul Myersberg wrote The Man Who Fell to Earth.
Rogue's,
He was actually a very prominent collaborator of Nick Rogue's.
Yeah.
And it has very much a sort of a Nick Rogue-y kind of a glossy, vacant kind of we're in something, but we don't quite know what we're in feel.
Speaking of which, I'm here to pitch you another one. I was thinking about this last night.
We are going to do Eureka. I knew you. I knew
For anyone listening to the show right now, check my Twitter from last night. So this is not pre-planned. Where I talked about, where I said all those humans out there who are Gene Hackman fans but have never seen Eureka or Scarecrow, you're living in a fog.
I just
the two greatest.
I just knew you were going to say Eureka, and it's one.
That is one of Nick Rogue's most interesting movies. It's it's kind of the tail end of that golden run where it starts going a little left field. But I saw it on TV, and it has a line in it, which has become my favorite line in cinema, believe it or not. And Gene Hackman starts off as he's looking for gold. He's got no money. You know, the first part of the movie is just this guy struggling in the wilderness, and it's pretty kind of harrowing what he's going through. But by the end of the movie, in the second act, it's kind of like a Citizen Kane character who's just loaded. And he just has this one line where he just turns and he goes, "I used to have it all. Now I've just got everything." And that line literally, it just took me back. It was almost better than anything in Citizen Kane. Take that, Orson. But it really was. It hit me. But then there's also a really batshit quality to the film with Rutger Hauer, and there's other things that happen that are there's a court case scene that has to be seen. It feels very strange.
I think it's fair to say that it's one of the most peculiar movies ever made. But we love it.
No, it's truly. I'm really excited to hear this, and it definitely has elements of horror. I mean, there's some really grotesque. A grotesque murder at the center of this movie that is really
because of your enthusiasm, I'll have to bring this forward on the schedule now,
if there's any extras you need, I will go to England. An old professor of mine made a film with Nick, produced Full Body Massage, his Showtime film, and so he going to film school, that was the most exciting thing to me, was that he knew Nick and had all these great letters from Nicholas Roeg, which started his advice to Michael Nolan was, if you're making your film, the first shot of the day should be the most elaborate possible shot, which involves every single crew member and have a very complex piece of equipment and movement. Have absolutely zero intention of using it in your movie. Get everyone distracted so you can work out what the fuck to do. And I remember reading it in those exact words as his 10 guides to making a film. I was like, that's genius. You know, it's just like you need that first day just to figure out how to exist in the film. But this is very exciting. I'm excited about Eureka. That's great. Great news.
I just wanted to briefly mention a couple of titles that some are horror, some are not, but some that I think our audience would appreciate. You guys did Wild at Heart, the David Lynch movie, which is very exciting. And that one did sell out,
That did sell out.
Yeah, but that was cool because I think there was a UK version of it, and you were able to cart over a lot of the extras, I believe.
I think we brought over everything that was on the American DVD, I believe.
Right.
Did Lynch have any interest in partaking in any extra for that, or?
We did actually approach him, but he seemed we actually, the reason that we approached him was about the deleted scenes that people wanted that were exclusive to the thing that he had done called the lime green set or something.
Yes.
But he declined to give us the deleted scenes because he said that they were not good enough to be on a Blu-ray. They were only good enough to be on a DVD. That was his position.
I think that's actually kind of cool. That's cool. That's a good rejection if you're going to get one.
That sounds like him.
That's interesting, but came with free coffee or something on the side. Now, would you re-release that one because of that popularity?
I'm not sure about that. I mean, because I feel that in a case like that, everyone that wanted it had a chance to get it.
Yeah.
You know, because as we said earlier, since the early days of not knowing what we were doing, we've put sort of pretty strict sales limits of 3 per person on something that we think is going to be very popular. And then when it gets down to the last 1,000, we drop down to 1. And in the Blob, which we had increased to 5,000, we went to 1 at the 2,500 stage, which I thought was very generous on Screen Archive's part, because, I mean, they're in the business to sell things. They're not in the business to slow down things and stop them from selling. So we tread a very thin line between really wanting to accommodate and helping the fans and trying to support the fact that we know that they want something, and trying not to end up sitting with a warehouse full of product, at the end of the day.
Have you had anything that's been requested a lot, especially if it's horror?
I assume your Facebook page is like awash with people saying, release this. Why haven't you released this?
If what I wrote there the other day was, I said, why don't you just write the list of every film that's ever been made, and then we're covered.
Has anything recurred though? A lot, like because of something like Fright Night. Falling Through the Cracks, which is a big film of that period, and that makes sense to me. Blob as well, Christine. Whereas other films like The Believers and stuff will be more idiosyncratic. It's for somebody who's really interested in Martin Sheen's filmography. No, but are there anything that kind of recurs that's like, oh, that really hasn't been released, and there might be a good reason, a studio reason why a title has never really emerged? Have you had any of those?
We used to have an adage back in the soundtrack days, 20, 25 years ago, where if we got 10 requests for something, we would know never to put it out because we knew that would be they would be the only 10 people.
That's funny.
Or it was the same person asking for it 10 times.
Right. Yeah. Interesting.
I can't help but chuckle at sometimes when we look at our Facebook page. It's often the same people asking for the same things over and over again. And I have a feeling, of course, that they won't sell, but that's not really our brief. I don't want to sound like some phony philanthropist.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, we will not be able to continue if we can't pay for titles to come out. But everything the revenue that comes in goes straight back into buying more titles. So it's sort of become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Brian and I and Julie chipped in out of our own pocket to start this thing. It's purely self-funded. We didn't go to any bank. We couldn't. It was 2008, 2009. No bank was going to lend us any money. So we've self-funded everything. And it's become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Right now, it pays for itself, and there's a little bit left over to keep pushing into the next things. So we will go out of business when people stop buying the Blu-rays that we choose to put out. But the phony philanthropist part is this. We don't have to necessarily think that anything is going to do well in order to put it out. We have put out things that I know going in will be total clunkers. And all I say to people is, providing I can get a blob this year, all of those sins will be paid for. It's like when I started the soundtrack restoration program at Fox, I was putting out things like Stormy Weather, Julie Andrews' Star. I was putting out How Green Was My Valley. All of them were tanking. And then I got Star Wars and worked with Lucasfilm. We put out the 4-disc set on Arista, and that sold enough to cover all of the other things. And I employ the same philosophy, if that's the right word, with Twilight Time. We have absolute clunkers, but they're films that we love or we feel personal about for whatever reason. And providing I can find something that will pay for all the losses that I'm racking up on those titles, we can stay in business and we can continue.
It also looked like you were sneaking some titles. I think, was it a Peckinpah or something where you had an old film? I hadn't even heard of it. Something Wine, and you're putting it on another disc, like a second feature.
For every hardcore Peckinpah aficionado, there was a film that Peckinpah made for television in 1966 that everyone's heard of, but very few people had seen. And the only reason they haven't seen it is because it was broadcast once on ABC television, never shown again, never released in any kind of home video format. And then in the 70s, ABC wiped the master tape. So it made it pretty difficult for anyone to see it at that point. Those of us that were sort of in the know, because we'd worked on many Peckinpah projects over the years, the only way you could see it was Jason Robards used to have a personal copy of it. That got donated to a museum in New York. And there were sort of black and white kinescopes floating around, but it was shot in color. And a good color version of it just didn't exist. And then just about 2 years ago, in the Susskind collection, they found a 1-inch dub of the 2-inch master, which was donated to UCLA. UCLA screened it in 2013 once, and we made immediate plans to license it from them. We knew that we couldn't release it as a standalone because the quality is poor, etc., but because we also had Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia and we had the Killer Elite from MGM-UA, we thought that we would put Noon Wine on as an extra on one of those discs, which is what we've done. We put it on Killer Elite.
And has that come out yet?
It just came out
Okay,
a
yeah, I
couple
need to
of weeks
look
ago.
that.
Yeah.
I remember Monty Ellman told me that he edited, came in some editing on Killer Elite.
He
at
is
one point.
he is one of the 2 credited editors on that film.
He claims he didn't do as much as he was getting credit for on that one, but that Sam wasn't in a good place at that point.
No, I think
And so it was very difficult to
it's
get
fair. It's fair to say that the Killer Elite is one of the Peckinpah movies that it's very difficult to make a case for.
Yeah.
Other than it was directed by a guy who at one time made The Wild Bunch.
Yeah, but it still has fun moments, and it almost feels like something Michael Mann drew a little bit on. Strangely enough, maybe not the style, but some of the story. I don't know. It's an interesting film, but yeah, it certainly isn't quite up to the bar.
As we often say, the first 30 to 40 minutes of it, which is still sort of vintage Peckinpah,
Right.
and then it just sort of it goes nowhere, and they try to tie in a kung fu aspect, because it was all the rage in the mid-70s,
Right.
and that didn't work.
Yeah.
So it's one of those films that sort of just doesn't. It's like a whole grab bag of loose ends. It doesn't add up to anything. But Peckinpah was in a seriously bad personal place at the time, and from which he never recovered. Let's face it,
right.
he never recovered.
And they go into that on the extras of the Alfredo Garcia too, just about the demons. I do have a horror question, which is it must be also getting difficult because there are companies like Scream Factory and companies who that's what they're doing. Like that's all they're branding themselves with as being the horror. So they're out there getting most of the good stuff. That's why I was surprised that The Blob could even still been out there to get, in a sense. So is it because of your relationships that you could still secure some of the interesting titles rather than having to just go to the dregs of total obscure shot on video, crappy 80s horror, which I don't foresee you doing?
No, I don't think we can do that. No. I mean, I like Scream Factory.
Of course, we're fans of that.
I mean, Jeff Nelson is a good guy. I think that they're in the business of getting horror films. That's what they do, and most of the studios will give those films to Scream Factory, as they should. We got The Blob and Fright Night and Christine and Night of the Living Dead 90 simply because of the fact that we're licensing from Sony and other companies aren't. Scream Factory, for whatever reason, aren't licensing from Sony, so it's obvious that we can get Sony films. But when I went to Fox and said, can I have Ravenous or Legend of Hell House, they said, oh, no, much better fit to give that to Scream Factory. And it is a better fit.
I don't know about Legend of Hell House. I think that might have been a better Twilight Time. And I'm not saying that, because I think it has this kind of classier British, I don't know, feel. It's probably because you're British and I'm talking to you right now. It probably has nothing to do with that. But I did feel Legend of Hell House didn't necessarily, I guess they have a very 80s feel. And Legend of Hell House is, I only saw it for the first time last year, and really was surprised how great a movie it is. It's a lot of fun. One. Roddy McDowell.
Well, Legend of Hell House is sort of more of a ghost story.
Exactly.
And we feel that, we like horror films as much as the next person, but maybe not as much as the people that post on our Facebook page.
Right.
and therefore, I think that those people are better served if those movies are on Scream Factory.
Right. And they get a lot of flack too. I mean, he comes
We've
on and tells us
multiple times,
and it's because, and he actually, has quite a close, obviously, relationship with the fans. Like, it's very open to discussing these things, but the artwork, and that's, I guess, another question. Do you guys always go for just the classic poster and cover art, or do you ever reinvent the art?
We've taken a lot of heat for not using the poster art most of the time. I would say that we go with the poster art when it's Saul Bass or when it's something really, really striking that cannot be, messed with. But we give full rein to our graphic designer, whose name is Louis Falzerano, to sometimes come up with some really cockamamie things. And we've gone with them, and we always get the 100 people who hate it and the 100 people who like it.
I love the Blob one, by the way. I think it's a pretty
the
awesome.
one that he did for the Blob, which we didn't put on the cover because I didn't feel it was right to put it on the cover, but we put it on the cover of the booklet.
Okay,
we've gone with one of the Blob posters, not the one on the DVD with the face in the Blob, but we've gone with the upside down pink Blob for the cover.
Right,
but we've gone with Lewis's creation for the booklet. And as a shameless plug, we also have a sort of a sideline company called Twilight Time Art, where Lewis, in fact, does limited edition lithographs of his covers.
That's cool.
Can you find that on the same website?
TwilightTimeArt.com is Lewis's website, where he is, in fact, doing high quality prints of the covers that he's designed for our titles.
Oh, that's very cool.
Wow.
I did not know that.
I know you've probably addressed this online, but since you're on our show and it's a horror show, I'd like to hear the story from you. Obviously, one of your most controversial titles was the Night of the Living Dead 1990 remake, which is I love it a lot. I think it's
controversial.
Why? Well, because it came out and there was what was the issue? It was
that there was a color that looked too blue, was what I heard.
Yeah. So what's the true story behind this whole thing?
Well, I can only tell you what we know, because as you know, and I probably should have pointed this out earlier, but I think we've pointed it out about 10 billion times on our Facebook page. We don't do the transfers ourselves. So therefore, whatever title we license from whichever studio, we release what it is they give us. Now, in the case of Sony, top-of-the-line restorations, I don't even look at what I don't have to, because nothing comes our way from Sony unless it's past Sony's stringent, and I mean stringent, QC. So there was nothing wrong with that master. When we released it, we thought it looked pretty damn great. The detail, the 4K quality of it, everything about the NOTLD 90 transfer is absolutely on a par with everything that Sony does. However, they had made the decision to make the opening 20 minutes of the film darker than it had been on any previous home video or television broadcast edition. And I think that we know that most of the young horror fans that really grow up and are now big Blu-ray fans are people who did not see these movies in theaters.
Right, yeah.
They saw them either on broadcast television, where the contrast is boosted beyond belief. Everything looks like it's taking place, at noon. And if they didn't see it on TV, they saw it on cable, and you're seeing the same high contrast thing, or VHS. So they were shocked and horrified, no pun intended, when they saw a darker Night of the Living Dead. So they screamed at us. They wanted it to be withdrawn. They wanted it, a new transfer generated. They wanted all of this. And we said, well, we can't do any of that. We've only got 3,000 copies, but here's what we will do. If anyone doesn't like it, you can return it for a full refund, which we thought was a very generous gesture that we made. Do you know how many refunds we got? 11. 10 of them from one person.
Oh.
There was absolutely nothing wrong with the transfer at all.
Right.
What had happened, we later found out, was this, that the DP of the film, his name was Frank Prinzi, had talked to Sony technicians on the phone, and he had told them that one of the things that the director and I always were worried about was that the opening was too bright. Is there any way that we can darken it? So
it's coming from the creative
so
place?
the Sony team said we can do that. But the controversy, if there was one, and I think that this was all just a complete storm in a teacup, as it often is, apparently Frank Prinzi never either wanted to or was ever given the opportunity to see the finished transfer. So that it may be the case that Sony went too dark. I had heard from all of the people that run the restoration groups at all the studios that one of the things that the fans hate the most is if the image is darker than they're used to seeing, no matter what the film, whether it's a horror film or whatever. They don't like it being darker. And the truth is that the actual camera negative and even the early release prints are always darker than anything that would ever end up on television or VHS. So when you actually do go back to the camera negative and you start to make it look like it did actually look or even should have looked, it is sometimes going to be markedly different to what the fans are used to. And then when they see something different, they scream and say, that's not what we wanted. We want the other thing.
But Savini came out and actually...
Tom Savini, who we never interacted with at all on it. We never talked to him or anyone on it. He was all over Facebook saying he thought it was great.
Yeah.
So again, like everything to do with the way a film looks, it's purely subjective, I think that they were shocked. The fans were shocked. They weren't expecting it. They thought that there was something wrong, that we had done something faulty, that they had a defective disc, when in fact it's a beautiful 4K transfer. It's a wonderful, again, just like Mind Warp, they made a beautiful looking film out of a fairly low budget movie,
Again, it speaks to the ownership that humans have over things
Yeah.
that
Yes,
they
exactly.
experience. They didn't make the film. They didn't purchase it. They're not.
But I want it the
but
way
it's
I
theirs,
remember it.
and that's why I think that's why the medium works so well, because you do have that very personal connection to things.
Which
So
is,
that makes sense.
Which is why NOTLD 90 won't be coming out again, at least not on Twilight Time, because it's like, why would we put ourselves through that hassle
Yeah.
again? Sony is not going to go back and do another 4K restoration
Right.
on a film that they have, let's face it, not that much interest in.
And yet it would sell. I know I'd love to see that again at that quality, because I've only seen it
I
the
bought
one
it
time
as
when
soon
I
as it came out.
Oh, I'll watch yours.
On
I
that
don't.
Blu-ray.
I'm good. That's easy.
I'd like to. When we have guests on, and obviously because we're a horror show, it's always interesting to hear some of their background in terms of discovering films, falling in love with films. Are there any horror titles that you remember as a kid in your formative years that you just fell in love with when you saw right off the bat? Some of your favorites, that is.
Onibaba, Japanese film.
Oh yeah, that's a
The
great
masks.
That was something that you will never forget seeing, when you're young. Exorcist, of course, for me too. I don't think I'd ever been as scared ever in a movie as I was during that. That really was frightening. And I'd seen a lot of things, on British television, which was much more, shall we say, liberal than American television was in the time, 60s, when I was sort of, 10, 11, 12. There was a lot of scary stuff on UK television, just Roald Dahl's Tales of the Unexpected. One of the most frightening things I'd ever seen. I used to have horrible nightmares from those short stories that Roald Dahl either wrote himself or commissioned other people to write under the umbrella of a series that was called Roald Dahl's Tales of the Unexpected.
Here, Roald Dahl is a children's writer.
No, I
and
know,
that's what
I
he's
know.
known for. He did Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
know.
But the
James and the
BFG
Giant
as a
Peach.
kid was terrifying. I
The
remember reading
Witches
that.
was pretty damn
Witches.
terrifying.
Nick
yeah.
Rogue again, yeah.
Yes, you could argue that Roald Dahl's stories may be for children, but they're pretty frightening.
Yeah.
some of them.
And I know a lot of that stuff, the British television, especially the stuff that strays into horror, is getting re-released. Now, every time I open Sight and Sound, I see something called Sleepwalker or something was a new one, BFI. I think they're called BFI Classics or something. And it seems like, it's cool that all the stuff that to Americans will be totally unknown.
I'm holding
It'll
out
be
on
like
the Quatermass series. I
Yeah,
can't
there's-
wait.
no,
Or
there's some
what's the one
stuff-
that Scream Factory just did? It was like the Doctor, the Devil.
Yes, The Doctor and the
yeah.
Devils. That's
Yeah,
a
that's
good
it.
one. That's another Fox one you see that they got.
Yeah.
See, that's a good fit for them. Doctor and the Devils, which I would have loved to have had that one. Ravenous and Legend of Hell House were three that I did actually lobby Fox for, and all three of them ended up going to Scream Factory. But I don't mind. Jeff is a great guy, and I know that they know their market. They know what they're doing with those films. Whereas for us, it would be just another film on the slate, even if we liked it a lot. The Haunted House of Horror. Do you know that movie directed by Michael Armstrong?
No.
Mark of the Devil, directed by
no.
Mark
Michael
of the
Armstrong.
Devil,
Devils.
I know.
I have one of the original
Witchfinder General.
barf bags.
Yeah, I have a barf bag of that.
Yeah.
They're fun. Probably reprint, yeah.
These are the movies that Tenderness of the Wolves with Uli Lommel.
yeah.
Do you remember
Yeah,
that? These are the movies that I remember being bloody scary. Mark of the Devil, I can't watch. I have it on DVD and I won't open it. I won't take it out of the shrink wrap.
Wow.
I've been waiting for a good one of that. Or maybe the new one is I bought a DVD version of Mark of the Devil a couple of years ago, and it wasn't a very good print. I was kind of let down because I'd seen it in the theater before, and it wasn't nearly as good. But I don't remember who put that one out.
Mario Bava films, Black Sabbath,
Oh,
Black
yeah.
Sunday.
Are any of them available, or are they all spoken for, most of Bava's stuff?
I think the Bava stuff is spoken for.
Yeah.
In fact, I think
Kino
The good
did some
Bava
of them,
stuff.
right?
Kino
Yeah.
has
A lot
got the one that I would have liked that Kino have is called Planet of the Vampires,
Yeah,
which I still to this day maintain is where Alien came from.
Yeah. No, and Prometheus, I remember when Prometheus came out, it really showed its hand because even just the look of it, it's a great looking film.
That might be Mario Bava's best movie. I know that Tim Lucas will probably disagree, but is it Mario Bava's best movie?
Maybe. I mean, the anthology is it's 2/3 of a great movie.
Which one is that?
The one, it's just totally.
Not Black Sunday. What's the name of the?
Black Sunday is the
it Black
anthology.
with the
Is that the
dripping
one?
water.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, I'm confused.
I feel
with
like
Black
I think
Sabbath.
you're getting it mixed up with
Black
Black.
Sunday is the one where Barbara Steele is put into the
Yeah,
thing.
so it's not that.
It's Black
No, no.
Sabbath.
It isn't. It's
We're
Black
talking about Black
Sabbath.
Sabbath.
Is
Yes,
the
I love that one.
anthology.
Yeah, one of the stories. Well, we did an anthology episode once and realized that the American version had changed the order.
Oh, yeah.
So the version
Which is
I was
totally-
watching had changed the order, and really just it didn't work. They left the slowest one to the end, which kind of dissipates the whole movie by the end. But that middle,
You watch the
drip of
original
water,
sound? Yeah, it's amazing.
drop of water is incredible. you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
And you kind of see all of Argento coming out of that one, like just the color and lights and expressionism. It's
Right.
interesting.
So,
But,
So what are we looking forward to? So Fright Night's going to be the one that's next that you announced this weekend.
Yeah, this weekend we'll announce our January, February slate, and so Fright Night is for January 20th. We haven't said that publicly before. That'll be. We also have The Bride Wore Black coming in January, so that'll be a scoop. Which is
not the
of course,
Truffaut.
Yeah, the Truffaut.
Oh, the Truffaut, the revenge film. Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
And a favorite of mine that we are trying to schedule in February, which is a new transfer that Fox is doing right now, of perhaps one of the strangest, yet for me, one of my favorite sort of sci-fi pictures from the early 70s, Zardoz.
Oh wow! Well, we have fans. That's BJ put my face on Sean Connery.
Yeah, because
once.
that is one
Yeah, I
sexy
remember that
Sean
one.
Connery corset.
Yeah.
That will be it's cool when people can experience a movie like that for the first time on Blu-ray. Seeing every hair on Sean's body perfectly. Also, and when is Eureka in the pipeline to be next year or?
It was sort of in a nebulous place in 2015, but I will
Now seeing my excitement, you realize
It's got to be pushed up.
I will champion it for you.
That's right, but then I think I've just broken my own rule because I said that when one person wants something,
Yeah,
there you go.
I'm going to
sell.
post on
He's
it
going to be on your
tonight.
Facebook page
Before this
tonight.
airs, I'm
When's
just going to
Eureka?
write, could Eureka come out just to help you get things moving? But it is funny how certain movies leave a real impression. And what I like of movies like that where people haven't really discovered, but I think that if they did, it actually would connect.
Right.
I mean,
just
Scarecrow's
wrote
another one.
down
It's
Eureka.
bizarre to me that less people have. It's like Pacino and Gene Hackman
Yeah,
in literally one of their best films, and I really don't meet many people who've seen that movie.
Scarecrow is an absolute classic.
Yeah, no, and Jerry Schatzberg is a name that no one really knows that director. So you never know with films.
You talk about horror. Yeah. What happens to Al Pacino in the prison farm late in that movie? That's horror.
Yeah, no, horror's experiential for sure. I see a lot of movies where we talked about Irreversible once. We all were disagreeing, but like I always think if it's something that is just so horrific and there's real dread, to me that could be horror.
I saw Scarecrow in a theater on the bottom half of a double bill, and I never forgot it.
Yeah,
it made such an impression.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's on Blu-ray. I assume it's probably not. I don't.
I think is that Warner Brothers? It might be.
And so some studios without going into details of bad mouthing, but some studios are obviously going to be harder to get deals with, and some obviously because you have Sony, a good relationship, it's a lot easier.
Well, Warner's, which has perhaps one of the finest catalogs, in movie history. And in fairness to Warner's, and I've been lucky enough to do some great projects with them over the years. I mean, I produced a documentary that got an Oscar nomination for Warner's in 1997. It was called The Wild Bunch, an album in montage.
Oh yeah, I've seen it. That's great.
We went to the Oscars. Paul Cedar and I, he directed it. We wouldn't have done that without Warner's. And ironically, my partner in Twilight Time, Brian Jameson, was the executive who greenlit that project. So my history with Warner's goes back, more than 20 years, and I've had way better experiences with them than I've had not so good experiences with them. And they've always had one of the finest home video divisions. But they've always been very consistent in that they've always had a no license policy, even back in the early days of video, and Criterion couldn't get anything out of them. And only just lately they allowed Scream Factory to participate in the Nightbreed thing. They gave Criterion Badlands because I think Terrence Malick put some pressure on them to give it to Criterion, in the same way that Oliver Stone put a bit of pressure on them to give us Heaven and Earth. So they've gone from having an absolute zero tolerance for licensing to having a little eeny-weeny tiny bit of tolerance for it. And maybe that will grow, who knows. Again, it all depends on who's in charge at any given time.
Interesting.
Their archive department is slightly, I mean, they at least put some care into their stuff instead of some of the other studios who do just have an intern burning stuff. But like, I know with like 13 Women, they actually like regrained the entire film. Like they really do kind of go above and beyond for some of their archival titles, which makes it good.
Well, they certainly do for the ones that they put on Blu-ray. They do.
So full circle, I'm just going to leave you with that. The Haunting of Julia. It's out there, and no one wants it because no one knows about it.
Well, it's on Netflix, as you say.
Oh, it was. Sometimes they disappear. Sometimes they're on for a little while, but they never look that good. Some look worse than others. Also, Keir Dullier's in that one as the husband, and I know that film that was one of my top finds of last year when I finally saw it. I just remember being really unnerved and creepy slow burn. Check it out if you can.
It's on my list.
A creepy Keir Dullea film that we have coming out in November is Bunny Lake is Missing, which is the Otto Preminger film.
Yeah, that's a good film. I'm a big Preminger fan.
And while it's not a horror film per se, it's certainly creepy and weird,
And it was kind of Flight Plan was meant to be kind of a remake. That Jodie Foster on a plane thing. I remember when it was coming out, people were saying it was a direct remake. And then I saw it and I was like, really? It's really not, but it does have a similar story.
Really? I had never heard that.
Yeah, no, it was. I heard it was a remake.
That's the one of her looking for her daughter.
Looking for her daughter, and then you're not sure if it's all in her head, and that happens on a plane in this thing, and everyone's kind of, it's weird. But because I had seen Bunny Lake is Missing, which is such a great title, you could almost remake the title and make something totally unique. But cool. There's lots of, that's really interesting. There's a lot of good stuff in there.
Yeah.
So if you want to buy Twilight Time stuff, Scream Archives, you guys are active on Facebook.
Screen, not Scream.
Screen Archives.
See, he's so caught up in horror, he said Scream Archives.
Screen Archives.
Well, we'll have links.
And you guys are pretty active on Facebook. You also have a Twitter, which is...
I do.
Is it just Twilight Time?
I have to run the Twitter under the Twilight Time name. Yes, I've only posted, I think, about 170 times since we started.
I'll be harassing Eureka tonight.
I have to do it more often, but I don't really understand Twitter. I have to confess, I don't.
Elric can help
Facebook,
you out.
Facebook, I can kind of get, but Twitter, I don't.
I had to because I had started a cafe here called Jump Cut Cafe, and it was like a film thing. But I had not used Twitter up until then. I had a Twitter account, still didn't know. And then you just start to kind of see how people use it. I still don't use it that well.
You're
just
pretty,
like sharing.
You're like
you're pretty active.
I'm no
on
Brian
there all the
Collins.
time.
Right, of course.
The thing about Twitter that I find the most baffling is it discourteous if you don't? Do you have to reply to everyone's tweet?
No, definitely not.
Because I don't really reply to anybody's tweet.
I'd say if it's interesting. The easiest way to do that, to seem polite, is there's a little star.
I favorite.
And you push a star. It means, I accept your point. Well done. But you don't have to interact. Because sometimes you'll get somebody who will write you 10 comments in a row without you. And the best way to kind of say, oh, thank you, is to give a little star. It doesn't show up anywhere. You're not committing. It's just,
Now you know what it means when Elric favorites your tweet.
Yeah, basically. If I haven't retweeted you, I didn't care for
your
it.
secrets away.
Exactly. So,
but thank you so much, Nick, for coming on. It was a lot of fun talking about Twilight Time and how it all works. And I don't know, you start shouting these titles out, and I'm like, oh, God, I got to make a list and buy as much.
I made a list while we were
let's work it out
here.
numerically, because we're recording this obviously a couple of days earlier. So by Friday, how many? If your units keep going of the blob, how
Friday morning?
If you were predicting from today. By Friday,
500 more
when this plays,
250 a day, right?
How many do you think would be left? Who knew we'd be in a math equation to end the show? I'm excited.
If you leave Boston on a train at the same time,
we probably would.
By Friday.
Maybe by Friday, they might be down below 500.
Okay, so if you're listening to this, I bet you we'll at least sell another 100 units of that, I would guess, including mine. So let's get on that. Cool. Well, yeah, that was very interesting.
Well, thank you guys so much. It was great fun.
Yeah.
I'm
next
pretty
week
psyched
is
for next week
birthday.
because it's my birthday,
That's
and
right.
we're discussing insect films.
It's
the
her
Hellstrom
pick.
Chronicle.
The Hellstrom Chronicle. I've got to write that one down.
That's a classic.
Okay.
I've not seen
That's
that
the greatest insect movie of all.
Oh, wow.
Oh, man. All right. There you go. Now you know how to kick off next week.
Not Invasion of the Bee Girls. So note that down.
Directed by Waylon Green, who wrote The Wild Bunch.
Oh.
Wow.
Okay.
Okay. This is like the
And if you need another gig, we have
insect
an
films.
extra microphone every week. You could just be silent and chime in with very obscure facts like
That's
that.
great.
I think that would be.
That is
It's what we're
perfect.
missing here.
Yeah.
So but we will have Morgan Peter Brown from Absentia will be joining us, and I think Dave Parker's coming back because
Right on.
That Run Red.
yeah,
It'll be fun.
Yeah.
So, yeah, good
See you
stuff.
then.
Thank you.